Firelight flickers across empty stone walls, filling the silent room with shadows and the restless crackle of burning wood. Then, a sinister energy hangs in the air as weapons and armor gleam in the dim, crackling light. Arhin, a calm and enigmatic man, stands in the dim room as glowing embers drift softly around his faint smile. Heat shimmers along the blade as a glowing sword steams in the darkness, its intensity filling the room with a tense, electric silence. A young man with dark hair locks his fierce gaze forward, his eyes glowing with determination. Arhin stepped forward, his voice cracking with urgency as he insisted he couldn't afford to fail now. A threatening man raises his glowing sword, the blade pulsing with heat against a backdrop of swirling darkness. A sudden, bone-rattling crunch echoes through the smoke, cutting sharply into the tension. Arhin, determined and fierce, bites down on the glowing broken object, his jaw set as sparks and fragments scatter from his mouth. Twin shards glowed softly as they floated through the darkness, scattering tiny sparks with each slow, drifting motion. Then orange embers drifted silently through the darkness, each spark floating apart as if carrying a secret no one could hear. A flaming sword blazed across a fiery backdrop, its light cutting through darkness as the title echoed like a challenge waiting to be answered. Intense flames surged around two glowing diamond shapes, their light flickering as the chaos swirled ever higher. A blinding explosion of fire swallowed everything, leaving only chaos and light where shapes and shadows once struggled to survive. A solemn, bearded man in a fur cloak stood beneath a shaft of light, holding an ornate sword upright before him in reverent silence. Father reminded Arhin that as the heir to Hao's caravan, he must never forget the family's duty. A tall, long sword glinted on the wall as a bearded man placed his hand gently on the head of a quiet young boy. Liam Caravan, a hopeful man with long, tied-back hair, spoke with pride about the righteous watchers being honored by the king and admired by everyone. A gentle hand rested on the head of a calm, blonde-haired man as someone reflected that this house had produced swordmasters for generations. A serious and reverent figure began to explain that what followed was carried out with deep respect. A close-up revealed an ornate sword glowing with mystical engravings as someone explained how House Caravan earned its renowned reputation. Liam Caravan, a serious older man with a gray beard, looked up at the night sky and quietly named the Invincible Guardians. Hands trembling but unyielding, a determined figure gripped the glowing, rune-engraved sword with unwavering resolve. Father placed a steady hand on Arhin's shoulder and told him he would one day inherit the title of Lord of Caravan. Father squeezed Arhin's hand and reminded him to carry pride in the steel flowing through his blood. Father, a supportive and earnest mentor, knelt before the young Arhin and urged him to restore their family's lost honor. A guiding father told Arhin it was time to rise and reclaim his place as the rightful protector of their land. A golden sunset washed over a quiet house, while Liam reminded his son that their mission was a duty they could not abandon. A village with sloping rooftops glowed beneath the sweeping sunset as someone spoke solemnly about the place being known as Caravans. The rooftops of Caravans glimmered under the warm sunset, while distant mountains faded gently into the evening sky. Sunlight poured over the peaceful village, with distant mountains standing silent beneath a flawless blue sky. Golden wheat swayed softly in the breeze beneath a vast, cloudless sky. Someone reflected quietly that stories of legendary ancestors always seemed distant, even as golden wheat bowed under the gentle wind. A young man with dark hair crouched in the wheat field, cutting stalks with a knife and flashing a confident smile. A contemplative figure gathered a small bundle of wheat, quietly noting that low-standing noble families often faced similar circumstances. A frustrated and resigned antagonist groaned, asking why they would ever be ruling over such a modest village. Arhin smiled as he told the villager, Liam Caravan, to pile the crops nearby under the wide blue sky. He paused beside the wooden cart, wiping sweat from his brow as he quietly reflected on the founding father's portrait in the main hall. Shadows stretched across the hallway as a stern man's portrait loomed above, his grip on the sword mirrored by the smaller blade mounted nearby. Liam Caravan, a serious older man with gray hair and a fur cloak, silently considered how neither he nor his father resembled the figure in the portrait. A glowing ancestral sword commanded the room's attention as a shadowy figure, guardian of its legacy, held the sheath with measured reverence. A pristine blade gleamed in the darkness, and someone remarked that it looked far too sharp to have been forged centuries ago. A massive book hovered with its pages spread wide against a field of stars, as an unseen voice insisted that this next revelation mattered most of all. None of the kingdom's records could be found, according to the narrator's solemn voice echoing over the floating books. A young man with blonde hair collapsed over a cluttered table, his strength spent from searching through endless pages for answers he couldn't find. Liam Caravan, contemplative and disillusioned, stood with hands on his hips and thought that everything their family had believed was nothing but a fabricated lie. Liam Caravan, attentive and somewhat playful, glanced sideways and asked the young master if he was daydreaming. Liam Caravan, friendly and joyful, announced to the villagers that it was almost time for their midday meal. A friendly man sitting on the ground invited the person nearby to hurry over or risk missing out on the steamed buns. The aggressive swordsman punched Liam Caravan hard, grumbling that the old fool deserved it, while Arhin, a shocked young man with dark hair, watched. Liam Caravan, confident and carefree, laughed under the bright sky and declared that it didn't matter if Caravan wasn't a respected noble house. Dust kicked up with each step as Boots moved steadily along a dirt path bordered by golden wheat. Sunlight streamed through drifting leaves under a cloudless sky, as someone said this was the caravan they cherished. Suddenly, a young man with dark hair sprinted through the village as massive swords crashed down from the sky behind him. 3 figures stood by the water's edge as one quietly wished for this moment to last. Blood pooled across the earth as an unknown figure's pale hand lay still on the stained ground. A terrified bald man with a mustache screamed and reached out, his panic echoing across the blood-splattered floor. A solitary figure stood beneath the moonlight, silently facing the distant mountains as the night pressed in around them. Blood-splattered wheat stalks caught the faint light, standing out against the darkness as silence settled over the field. Blood dripped on a pale cloth as someone remembered how foolishly they once clung to impossible hopes. A single water droplet fell, sending gentle ripples across the still surface. An ominous vortex twisted across the sky, churning orange and purple clouds as the winds gathered strength above the distant horizon. Liam Caravan, a responsible man on horseback, told the group he would head to the market before riding away into the sunset. Liam Caravan, confident atop his horse, asked if his unseen opponent was ready to go another round. A friendly man with easygoing eyes laughed awkwardly, then offered Kuhn an apple and teased him about always wanting fruit. Liam Caravan, an ambitious man with blonde hair, smiled and reminded everyone he intended to become the next Lord of Caravan. A young man with dark hair rode away on horseback as several cloaked figures called out wishes for a safe journey to their young master. Arhin smiled brightly against the glowing sunset, gripping his straps with fresh determination as hope filled the air. Someone in the golden field said they all felt truly fortunate to have Master Arhin. 2 men exchanged warm glances as one voiced his admiration for Arhin and wondered if anyone would be worthy to become his wife. Suddenly, Liam Caravan was struck in the cheek by an arrow, cutting off his words before he could finish. A shocked older woman reached out toward the fire-streaked sky, her silhouette framed by floating red orbs as darkness crept in. Blood splattered across a shocked man in a hood as a hidden attacker slashed him and he called out for Kuhn in disbelief. A bloodied, shocked figure in a hood jerked back, raising a hand defensively and muttering in confusion. Blood splatters violently across the golden wheat, staining the sunset field with fresh violence. A shadowy voice declared that this land must be destroyed, echoing through the crimson darkness as a heavy step resounded. A cloaked swordsman, menacing and silent, holds a dagger against the blazing red sky. 2 anxious men with mustaches lock eyes beneath the glowing sunset, each searching the other's face for answers neither can give. A single, terrified eye widened as the surprised and fearful figure blurted out a shaky question, unable to process the stranger stepping forward. A reserved, watchful man stands at the edge of a golden wheat field, facing a stoic, bald figure as the sun sinks low. A cloaked swordsman with long hair raised a glowing, cross-shaped sword, threatening Liam Caravan as he recoiled in fear among golden wheat. A shadowed figure with long hair stands in swirling red embers, and Liam Caravan speaks his family name into the smoky darkness. A brooding man with long hair stands beneath a dusky sky, gripping a cross-shaped sword as his cape whips in the wind. Arhin slashed the swordsman, crimson lines blazing across the hooded man's body as tears streaked down his face. Glowing red lines snapped tight, pinning Liam Caravan and several others in midair while the sword swordsman's mouth curled into a cold, triumphant grin. The swordsman, a menacing figure with white hair, stood resolute as debris whirled violently around him. A cloaked swordsman with long white hair darted away from the blood-soaked village as sunset painted the sky in ominous colors. Peaches tumbled silently through the dark sky, breaking the stillness with their gentle descent. A teddy bear tumbled from the shadows and landed beside an apple on the dim ground, the quiet moment settling heavily in the cool night air. Two figures faced each other on the somber ground, tension thickening as three red apples lay scattered between them. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, sweat beading on his shocked face as he struggled to process what had just happened. Moonlight cut through the mountains as a lone figure stared in shock at the bloodied body below, whispering in disbelief that this couldn't be real. A fallen man with a mustache lay sprawled on the blood-stained ground, whispering in disbelief that he couldn't understand what just happened. A menacing man seized the shocked young man from behind, his grip tight and the darkness pressing in around them. An elderly man with tear-streaked cheeks pulls a blonde-haired person into a tight embrace, grief and relief mingling in the quiet moment. A struggling captive tried to shout that he recognized the voice, but the older man kept him restrained and gagged in the shadows. Tears streaming down his face, Liam Caravan pleaded desperately for someone to assure him this was only a dream. A young man with dark hair clenched his teeth and through tears whispered that the villagers, every one of them, were gone. A young man with dark hair trembled in the darkness, whispering that some man had come to this place. A figure with long white hair stands alone in the golden light, surrounded by the bodies of those he has defeated. A brooding man in battered armor lay in the tall wheat, the helmet beside him glinting as he muttered that he needed just 10 minutes. Elsewhere, a threatening figure chased terrified villagers down a sunset-lit street as their desperate footsteps echoed against the empty houses. Screams tore through the village as a tearful older man watched helplessly while villagers were hurled aside by a brutal, unseen force. A devastating slash from an aggressive man with dark hair shatters buildings, sending debris flying in a violent burst through the heart of the village. High above the wreckage, a formidable and aggressive fighter stood alone as his powerful slash carved a path straight through the shattered buildings. Chunks of roof and chimney crashed down as the powerful swordsman in a cloak stood motionless amid the chaos. Then, a cloaked swordsman with a gleaming blade strode confidently forward as debris crashed all around him. The swordsman with long white hair stated in a steady voice that he was simply following orders. A focused and powerful figure slammed a clenched fist through the wall, sending shattered pieces flying in every direction. A grieving older man covered the eyes of a distraught young man beneath the full moon, both of them silently weeping together. Flames devoured the town as thick smoke twisted upward, and a single word echoed through the chaos. Someone called it calamity. Then, a burning town glowed beneath the sunset as someone declared the devastation was wrought by a single swordmaster. Clouds drifted across the sky as the bright full moon watched in silence. A majestic building rose beneath a swirling purple sky, its flag catching the wind in a moment of calm. Blood stains the floor as a young man with dark hair and an older, stern figure walk through the silent, corpse-filled hallway. Arhin, calm and dominant, stands over two unconscious men in the tense stillness of the room. Liam Caravan, a stern older man, flinches in shock as something unseen startles him. A swordsman slammed a young man with dark hair to the ground, leaving him bloodied and barely able to move. Still, a young man with dark hair clutched his head in pain, a tear slipping down his cheek as he whispered in confusion. A man with white hair leans in, his smile turning menacing as he lets out a chilling sound. Tears streaming, Arhin stared at his trembling hand, grief tightening his chest as the pain of loss washed over him. A worried and desperate woman rushes forward, her voice cracking as she calls out uncertainly for her mother. Suddenly, a figure with long hair shouted Arhin's name, snapping the surprised young man's attention toward the urgent call. A tearful woman pulled the young man with dark hair into a tight embrace, her voice trembling as she said how grateful she was to see her son. A trembling hand gripped someone's arm, the tension pulsing between them in the dim light. His mother, warm and comforting, held Arhin close as he felt a wave of relief in her embrace. Liam Caravan wrapped his arms protectively around Arhin inside the blood-stained room, holding him close as fear flickered in the boy's eyes. Arhin, a determined young man, kneeled before the wounded swordsman sprawled on the blood-stained floor. Kneeling amid blood and shadows, Arhin stared at the ground and quietly asked why fate had brought him to this moment. He gripped the bloodied fabric tightly, determination hardening his gaze. Dark stains spread across torn fabric, the silence heavy with the consequences of unseen violence. A desperate voice demanded to know the reason behind all the blood and sorrow. Arhin, emotional and protective, knelt to embrace Liam Caravan in the blood-splattered room as the swordsman watched from a tense distance. Liam Caravan, a calm and confident man, gazed forward with a slight smirk as the heavy silence lingered. Liam Caravan crouched protectively in front of the worried woman, declaring that he would return in 1 month's time. Liam Caravan, stern and commanding, ordered everyone to leave this land if they wanted to survive. A menacing man grips a glowing sword, metal clanking as tension crackles in the air. The wounded man with a dark glare clenched his sword, choking out a desperate question through gritted teeth. A young man with dark hair screamed at someone unseen, demanding to know why they had been betrayed. A brutal man drove a wooden stick straight through Liam Caravan's cheek, and pain twisted the older man's face into an agonized scream. Liam Caravan, wounded and desperate, clutched the woman behind him and demanded to know the reason for his suffering. A mysterious figure with long hair emerged from the shadows and began to reveal something cryptic. Liam Caravan, a serious man with long hair, stayed silent as tension hung heavy in the air. A mysterious and intense man with long hair fixed his glowing red eyes ahead and spoke with unwavering seriousness. Liam Caravan, a determined and weary survivor, led the exhausted group forward beneath the fading light, their silence heavy with the weight of recent tragedy. A worried young man with dark hair glanced back at the white horse, the crowd's silent stares pressing in as sunset deepened the tension. A wounded but proud knight was struck again in the head, insisting that he was a great knight who had slain the evil dragon. A large, armored hand slammed down as the resolute swordsman declared himself the kingdom's guardian, claiming his veins ran with steel. Liam Caravan's battered face hung upside down as he silently vowed to the heavens he would complete his third mission and strike down the coming evil. Liam Caravan, gentle and composed, softly called out to Arhin in the quiet of the forest. Liam Caravan, calm and caring, placed his hands on Arhin's shoulders and quietly urged him to leave this land with another and go far away. Liam Caravan, distressed and pleading, begged Mother to come with them and questioned what she could possibly mean by refusing. A gentle and serene woman smiled thoughtfully beneath the night sky, her calm expression barely shifting as the trees blurred quietly behind her. A lone woman with long hair stood calmly as swirling leaves caught the glow of an overwhelming light ahead. A tearful young man with blonde hair pleaded desperately, begging his mother not to leave and asking her to come with him. Half in shadow, a bearded swordsman with a fur cloak gripped his sword and spoke of legendary watchers and unbeatable guardians. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, and Liam stand side by side in silence, both gazing at the sword on the wall. Tears streamed down Liam's face as unseen hands rested on his shoulders, and he whispered that the truth had been hidden as history. A close-up of a serious mouth fills the frame as an unnamed character quietly asks Arhin for a promise. The unseen speaker demanded a solemn vow never to take up the sword, their words echoing through the mystical forest bathed in ethereal light. Arhin, a determined young man with dark hair, faced Liam Caravan beneath the moonlight, their silent confrontation thick with pain and longing. The concerned figure gripped Arhin's hands, urgently demanding that he promise to keep living no matter what happened. A gentle hand wiped tears from Liam Caravan's cheek, as the unseen voice told him to let go of revenge. Liam Caravan, his voice calm, told Arhin to live only for himself and not for anyone else. A calm young woman announced that the carriage was ready, while a surprised young man gasped beneath the moonlit trees. A woman, assertive and determined, suddenly seized Liam Caravan's arm in the dense shadows of the forest. Liam Caravan, subservient and controlled, held back Arhin as the desperate young man pleaded through tears for his mother to come with them. A sorrowful woman with closed eyes cried out for her mother in anguish. Liam Caravan, a blonde man urgent and protective, grabbed Arhin's hand and insisted they leave at once. A tense young man with dark hair reached out toward a calm woman standing in the shadows, ribbons swirling in the cold forest air. A tearful woman in the soft forest light told her son that she loved him more than anything. Leaves spiraled through the air as Liam Caravan, calm and composed, stood firm in the shifting light. Faint light spilled from a door left ajar, stretching long shadows across the wooden floor in the silent, uneasy room. A young man with dark hair strode away from the blood-stained bookshelf, his steps steady as books and papers lay scattered behind him. Arhin, injured but determined, pressed his face against the cold wall as blood pooled at his feet. A stoic and calm man stood still while an affectionate woman wrapped her arms around him in front of a wall lined with books. Arhin, a determined and protective young man, carried an unconscious woman on his back, his solemn expression sharpened by the harsh light stretching his shadow. An older and contemplative man guided his horse-drawn cart along a shadowed forest path, lantern light flickering gently through the trees. Liam Caravan stood in silence beneath the darkening sky. Horse hooves pounded the dirt beside a spinning cartwheel, as someone muttered that ordinary people stood no chance against such overwhelming power. In the gloom, a pair of hands gripped their straps tightly, and a somber voice insisted that only by accepting today's tragedy could anything move forward. A reflective older man with a white beard spoke solemnly, quietly wishing for something better for the one he cared about. A man with gray hair sat in the back of a wooden cart as someone nearby called out in shock, thinking the young master had returned. Tension built as a clenched fist hovered in the shadows, ready for whatever confrontation would come next. A young man with dark hair sprinted through the moonlit forest, insisting he would never abandon his parents. He dashed through the dark forest, insisting in a low voice that he couldn't just leave them behind. He clenched his fist tighter, determination burning in his eyes as he questioned whether he should simply give up and run away. Leaves whipped behind him as the young man with dark hair raced down the forest path, recalling that people claimed swordmasters were different from ordinary men. A crossbow glinted in the darkness as an unseen figure muttered that even swordmasters would die if struck through the heart. A set of vials filled with lethal poison dangled from a stranger's belt as they explained they had spent the last month securing them. A wolf-emblazoned flag rippled atop the building, silhouetted sharply against a blood-red sunset sky. A boot belonging to a determined figure landed heavily on the stone, just outside the looming building at night. A young man with dark hair looked up, his wide eyes catching the gentle warmth of the light above him. Red light flickered across the tied wooden post as a shocked and fearful figure stared, their wide eye full of dread. Blood streaked the battered face of Liam Caravan as he lay motionless, his closed eyes hinting at the edge of consciousness. A dark flag bearing a wolf emblem shuddered in the wind atop the castle tower, while a voice above dismissed everything below as foolish. A cloaked swordsman stood with authority before a closed door, looming over Liam Caravan as he lay unconscious and vulnerable on the floor. A cloaked male figure with long white hair stood beneath the twilight trees, telling his unseen opponent that they had chosen death. A dominant, threatening man in a cloak stood over a fallen figure, while a wary young man with dark hair approached the tense scene. The white-haired man with glowing red eyes glared, his silent presence radiating menace even in the moment when mercy had been offered. A serious mouth tightens and intense eyes narrow, tension radiating from the unknown character as the background pulses with silent anticipation. The young man with dark hair cried out in despair. A shadowed figure loomed over a young man with dark hair who lay motionless on the ground. In the shadows, a voice whispered for mother and father, longing for comfort that would never come. Blood stained the lips of the injured figure lying silent and pale, breath barely visible in the dim light. Light flared behind as Arhin tightly wrapped his arm, every movement deliberate and steady. A raw scream tore through the haze, pain and fury twisting together, too fierce for words. Tears streamed down the face of a young man with dark hair as he clung desperately to the sword. A deadly threat exploded through the darkness as someone screamed their intent to kill without mercy. A furious and determined man's eye glowed red as he shouted his intent to kill. Blood dripped from the blade as a menacing, injured man finally let the sword fall from his trembling grip. A young man with dark hair gripped the hilt of his sword, determination tightening his hold. A swordsman with a fierce glare slashed Arhin, catching the young man with dark hair off guard in the midst of close combat. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, stood ready with his sword drawn as Liam raised his gun against the fiery sunset. A mechanical crossbow lay on the ground as an unknown figure stepped close, boots pausing just beside the weapon in tense silence. Arhin, injured but determined, knelt over a fallen figure and let out a strained groan as the menacing swordsman closed in. He clawed at his throat, gasping Arhan's name as pain cut through every breath. A mysterious figure stepped forward into the fading light, holding a glowing object and noting that the other had not yet reached 18. The swordsman, a threatening and dominant figure, stepped toward Arhan with his blade drawn and told him he ought to thank the gods for his luck. The dominant swordsman towered over a vulnerable young man with dark hair, who knelt clutching his neck as a crossbow lay discarded beside him. A blond man trembled in fear as the swordsman loomed behind him, radiating silent menace that pressed into the air between them. A mysterious figure with blonde hair warned that anyone trying to continue the caravan lineage would be hunted down. The menacing swordsman glared upward, his red eyes burning with suspicion as Arhan stood silently over him. A mysterious man with dark hair spoke quietly, hinting that the caravan line carried a deeper importance than others realized. An injured figure with white hair clawed through the dirt, each movement slow and desperate. A woman with tangled hair lies motionless on the ground, her fate uncertain as silence settles over the scene. A young man with dark hair slouches forward, sweat dripping as he struggles to keep himself upright. Arhan, distraught and deeply troubled, leaned over the injured Liam caravan and thought that he felt wretched to his very soul. Liam, distraught and desperate, clutched the unconscious Arhan and cried out in agony. In the darkness, a frightened and shocked figure stared upward, letting out a terrified cry. From above, a concerned and urgent man with dark hair lifts an unresponsive woman into his arms and rushes forward. Anguish exploded in the void as someone cried out that they had lost everything. A young man with dark hair stands still, sweat beading on his brow as he looks up into the streaming light. A blue glow hovered above the young man's head as an unseen voice urged Arhan Caravan to stand with dignity. Blue energy surged from Arhan, the determined young man, as he hurled it toward the imposing portrait of a swordsman gripping his blade. Blue energy circled Arhan's waist and arms as he focused, the power building around him in shimmering waves. An elderly man with a white beard glowed beneath the portal as he solemnly addressed his noble descendant. Glowing blue light streaked across a chest, energy pulsing outward in a silent surge. A dark sky settled over the land as the narrator recalled a year passing since burying everyone he had lost. A bright full moon hung over the silent tower, bathing the night in an eerie purple glow. A brooding mansion loomed under the purple dusk as the narrator revealed he had spent an entire year preparing for revenge. Blood streaked the empty palace hallway, silent testimony to the violent attack just unleashed by the kingdom's most powerful swordsman, the so-called Guardian of Peace. Scattered aged papers caught the faint light as the narrator spoke of the righteous watcher who brings down evil. Liam Caravan, a brooding man, remembered every detail about the one who had taken everything from him. A dim desk lay cluttered with old books and letters, as an unseen voice demanded to know who ordered the massacre and why his family was killed. Several yellowed letters and scrolls covered the table, while the narrator wondered aloud what secrets the caravan lineage had tried to keep hidden. Papers and open books covered the desk, their silent presence hinting at secrets waiting in the quiet shadows of the dimly lit room. Wooden crosses stretched across the graveyard, and the narrator admitted there was one thing they understood completely. A somber sky deepened overhead, and the narrator stated that the people of Caravan lost that day would never return. Long shadows from the wooden crosses stretched over the ground as the sunrise painted the mountain in solemn gold. A curious young man with dark hair stands in a vast hall, watching a blinding flash spill through a door left slightly open. A focused and illuminated man looked ahead, while a silent figure stood quietly behind him, both faces touched by the soft glow. Arhan stared downward, his voice barely a whisper as he wondered aloud if this moment would mark his end. Blue light shimmered from the sword as energy pulsed around its blade, casting shifting shadows through the darkness. A powerful presence with blue energy swirling around him stood before the portrait, unable to comprehend what he was witnessing. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, stood tall as the swirling blue energy gathered and rose before him. Liam Caravan stood solemnly as blue ethereal light swirled and glowed around him. Liam Caravan, confident and commanding, stood with arms crossed as blue energy radiated toward Arhan, who faced him in the dim room. A legendary figure emerged from the shadows. The founding father of House Caravan was named in a hushed, reverent tone. Liam Caravan sensed that Arhin's heart was troubled. Blue energy surged around Liam Caravan as he stood calm and unshaken, mist swirling at his feet. A serious and confrontational man studied his opponent, asking if Arhin feared he had truly lost his mind. Liam Caravan, a white-haired man, addressed Arhin and asked if the young man was too shocked to respond to his ancestor's sudden appearance. A young man with dark hair flinched as the thought hit him. This might not be an illusion, but reality. A tall, cloaked man stood in silence as a young man with dark hair faced him across the sunlit room. Liam Caravan, wrapped in his fur cloak, wondered aloud if the person before him truly matched the legendary figure from his father's old stories. Arhin asked the older man why he hadn't appeared sooner. A young man with dark hair shouted out, demanding to know the reason for what just happened. A man in heavy armor clenched his fist, tension crackling in the quiet as he readied himself for the moment to strike. Someone off-panel yelled furiously, demanding to know why help had arrived so late. Arhin glared ahead, blue eyes blazing with resolve as he steeled himself for the coming clash. An older man with a beard in regal robes sat beneath blue light, his eyes reflecting quiet thought as the world around him held its breath. Shadows stretched across the worn tiles as the narrator weighed the cost of revenge, warning that it required sacrificing everything. Fresh claw marks tore deep into the wooden post, their edges raw beneath the fading twilight. A focused and contemplative swordsman kneeled behind the wooden training post as the last rays of sunset brushed the ground. An unseen voice remarked that his persistence was clear in how he clung to the sword, refusing to let go. Arhin, a distressed young man, knelt and gripped his sword tightly as a single tear slipped down his face. Then, a glowing pink aura flared around the kneeling young man as an unseen voice acknowledged witnessing the strength of his will. Arhin gripped his sword with unwavering determination, sweat streaming down his face as he refused to let his resolve falter for even a moment. Liam Caravan, his face half-shadowed, told Arhin that the depth of hatred in his eyes had finally become what he wanted. A dark, ominous silhouette with glowing eyes stood before the flames, reflecting bitterly on those who had slaughtered its children and villagers. The ground shook violently, a deep rumble echoing through the darkness as the ominous scene grew even more intense. A large cloaked figure stood in the grand hall and spoke of the long history that shaped these vast lands. A wise man with a stern gaze reached forward, telling Arhin he knew exactly why he kept swinging his sword despite everything. Liam Caravan, a stern-faced mentor, stood stunned as a glowing hand reached for him in the dim light. Stars shimmered overhead as a distant voice reflected that swordmasters have surpassed the limits of ordinary humans, hinting at something far greater. The narrator reflected that even those celebrated as prodigies could never reach these heights. A brilliant star blazed through the cosmic sky, and the narrator declared that one man stood far above all other superhumans. A lone figure with long hair stands at the edge of the world, quietly gazing toward the glowing horizon beneath a sky scattered with stars. A young man with dark hair stared wide-eyed into the strange light, shock freezing him where he stood. Liam Caravan, eyes glowing in the darkness, admitted to himself that his journey toward mastery was still just beginning. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, wondering if he was truly powerless to stop the man who had taken everything from him. He wondered if he could become a hero. Arhin, struggling as invisible hands tightened around his throat, demanded to know if he was truly helpless once again. A mysterious and resolute armored figure stood beneath the streaming light, declaring he would offer his help. A shadowy figure stood bathed in a fierce glow as an unseen voice urged him to surpass even the strongest swordsman. An unseen voice urged him to rise and one day use the blade of judgment against the murderer who had shattered his world. A close-up of a young man with intense blue eyes, he considered his only option and told himself there was just one way forward. A glowing sword gleamed on the wall as a voice declared that only an heir of Caravan could pass through this path. A determined older man with white hair stood beneath dramatic light, declaring that he alone carried the bloodline known as the blood of steel. An urgent and intense man embraced Liam Caravan, telling him in a low voice that he must consume his sword to move forward. Liam Caravan, a stern older man with white hair, looked up in shock as something unseen caught him completely off guard. Dark smoke curled from a sword driven deep into the earth, crackling and popping as the ground seemed to tremble beneath its weight. A rack of ominous spears glimmered in the warm light, their metal tips glowing faintly as the sound of crackling fire echoed nearby. Flames erupted across the brick wall, heat rippling outward as the fire roared louder than before. A hostile, aggressive man raised his flaming sword high, fire swirling around the blade as its heat threatened to overwhelm everything nearby. The forge burned steadily in the quiet room, casting flickering reflections across the swords and shield hung with careful precision. Liam Caravan looked down, his calm face lit by flickering shadows that hinted at something unsettling beneath the surface. Then Liam Caravan, a resolute man, gripped the glowing sword as flames roared around him. Flames surged higher as a massive glowing sword dominated the scene, its heat and power threatening to consume everything nearby. Liam Caravan, a wise and experienced mentor, quietly told Arhin that the legacy was passed to him from a half-dwarf. Warm light spilled across a young man with dark hair and an older figure as an unseen voice calmly explained that dwarves' outward appearances could be misleading. Liam Caravan explained to Arhin that through their bloodline, his descendants had inherited something vital. A surge of energy crackled as two swords glowed with a strange, mystical power, and someone quietly explained this was a special ability awakening. The unseen voice explained that this ability lets you consume swords and wield the memories and powers of those who once held them. Now, the unseen voice revealed that the power behind House Caravan came from the three legendary swords glowing against the darkness. Arhin, a determined young man, stood back to back with Liam Caravan and a scarred swordsman as glowing blades hovered menacingly around them. A determined older man grips his sword hilt, thinking that their family has produced swordmasters for generations and earned lasting renown. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, closed his eyes beneath the night sky and wondered aloud if consuming a sword could truly grant its power. He gripped the ornate sword, thinking how absurd and confusing everything felt. A young man with blonde hair looks downward, thinking the truth will only come out once everything is decided. He stared ahead, eyes wide with resolve, and thought to himself about what it truly meant to devour the sword. A young man with dark hair clenched his fist, tension crackling in the air. Sparks fly as a clenched fist heats the blade, and someone mutters that it must become molten. A dominant, shadowy figure ordered him to devour the glowing sword, voice echoing with command. Arhin grips the glowing sword tightly, sweat running down his face as he braces for whatever danger is coming. Sweat glistens beneath the glow as a young man with dark hair fixes his gaze, every muscle bracing for what comes next. Flames swirl as a menacing swordsman wields the glowing blade, wondering aloud if he's truly lost his mind or trapped in a nightmare. He clenched his jaw in defiance, admitting to himself that the weight of despair pressed down but refusing to let it win. A fierce young man shouts that he will do it, holding the glowing sword inches from his mouth. A hand lunged forward and seized its target with a bone-crunching force, the shout to seize it ringing out through the chaos. A young man with dark hair locked his gaze forward, sparks flying as he gathered every ounce of strength for the coming strike. A glowing shard hurtled downward, carving through the explosive flames as the chaos escalated. Orange shards drifted through darkness, each fragment pulsing with a mysterious energy as if carrying a secret ready to ignite. Then fiery projectiles streaked across the darkness, their glow intensifying as they tore through the air with ominous force. Amid the roaring fire, a voice cried out in agony. Flames devoured a hand as someone screamed in pain, the fire hissing and crackling around burning flesh. Flames surged higher, consuming everything in their path with a relentless, roaring blaze. A young man with dark hair writhed within the flames, his scream echoing as white light blazed from his eyes. Then, consumed by rage, he screamed as fiery energy erupted around him. Through the inferno, a powerful silhouette thrust a weapon skyward, defiant against the roaring wall of fire. Fire surged across the scene as someone's agonized scream ripped through the chaos. A glowing sword crashed against metal, sending sparks flying as the aggressive young man attacked with fierce determination. Sparks exploded as a hooded figure, an antagonist in pain, was hurled to the ground by an unseen force. Still, an injured young man with dark hair clutched his knee and let out a pained gasp on the cold stone floor. He writhed on the ground near the glowing sword, crying out in pain as his body twisted uncontrollably. A trembling hand gripped the bleeding wound tighter, and the injured figure groaned through clenched teeth from the sharp rush of pain. Then a hand clamped down hard, and a muffled cry of pain escaped from deep within the wounded figure. A young man with dark hair glared ahead, his bloodshot eye burning with determination as sweat traced down his cheek. Tears welled in his eye as Arhin stared forward, his focus unbroken by the pain coursing through him. A young man with dark hair stood alone among the blood-stained remains, and a distant voice urged him to remember. A bloodied man knelt in pain beneath a looming figure, as a distant voice urged him to remember. A young woman lay motionless above a glowing helmet, her stillness casting a heavy silence over the scene. A determined and angry man with glowing red eyes shouted a fierce reminder to remember the reason. A menacing man with dark hair raised his hand, red energy crackling as power surged ominously through his fingers. The menacing man with dark hair seized the glowing sword, his grip unyielding as power radiated from the weapon. A deep, jarring crunch echoed through the tense air as an unseen force unleashed its power. The menacing man with dark hair bit down hard on the glowing sword, his ferocity filling the air with a sharp, metallic sound. A young man with dark hair knelt, biting down on the smoking, glowing object as he declared he would see it through no matter what. Light and fire roared around the young man with dark hair as he bit down fiercely on burning, glowing shards. A young man with dark hair gripped a glowing sword and declared with fierce determination that he would become a swordmaster and seek revenge. Shards crashed downward, scattering light and shadow through the darkness. Birdsong drifted over the quiet house, but a sudden, piercing scream shattered the morning calm. He recoiled from the sudden jolt, shock written across his face. He grabbed the sword's hilt with trembling fingers, quietly starting to say that he was, before the words caught in his throat. A man with graying hair gasped for air, each breath sharp and ragged in the cold morning. A young man with dark hair sits on the cold floor, rubbing his face in silent frustration as a half-formed thought lingers unspoken. He stared ahead, realization dawning that what happened yesterday was no dream. It had all been real. A determined young man slams his foot down beside the glowing sword, sending a tremor through the ground. A close-up catches surprise flickering across his face as an unseen voice acknowledges the young man's impressive determination. A mystical voice revealed to the curious young man kneeling that his ancestors once held a hidden power within their bloodline. A stern older man stands solemnly as blue mystical energy swirls around him. Blue flames swirl as an unknown figure hovers above the ground, their presence marked by a voice recalling those unable to withstand the agony of sword consumption. Liam, serious and authoritative, asked if his words were finally believed. A figure half-shrouded in blue light declared to Arhin that every legend his father shared was real, and he himself was no illusion. Shock flashed across Liam Caravan's face as a cold sweat formed, his composure shattered by what he had just witnessed. A steady hand pressed against the ground as a faint glow shimmered in the calm silence. A young man with dark hair bowed low, stating his name and pledging respect to the great forefather. Liam Caravan, regal and proud, stood tall with his hands behind his back, a luminous aura surrounding him as he looked upward. Arhin knelt on cracked earth, facing the glowing figure as tension thickened between them. Liam Caravan smiled warmly and told the child to simply call him master from now on. Liam Caravan, a wise and authoritative mentor figure, explained that everyone who learned from him had followed the same path. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, looked up and asked if inheriting his master's strength was now truly possible. Liam Caravan's eyes widened in shock as he tried to process what he had just heard about his father. Liam Caravan stood close beside his son, sharing a moment of pride he always spoke about with deep conviction. Liam Caravan, a confident and inquisitive man, asked Arhin if consuming the blade would truly grant him the power he had been promised. Arhin, a young blonde man, knelt before Liam Caravan and told him he didn't feel any different after everything that just happened. Liam Caravan, an older man with gray hair and glasses, coughed nervously and admitted there was a slight complication. A man in a blue garment pressed his fist to his mouth as an unseen voice warned him about a problem, prompting him to question the meaning. Liam, calculating and strategic, revealed his plan to have Arhin devour his treasured sword, hoping it would make him a swordmaster. Liam Caravan stood in the shadows, reflecting that his bloodline had grown weaker through the generations. A glowing figure hovered above Arhin as Liam Caravan told him that his ability to consume swords surpassed even the family's expectations. A chilling voice explained that absorbing power from blades had become nearly impossible, casting doubt over everything that had come before. A swirling blue and white vortex of energy erupted, filling the space with raw, overwhelming force. A calm man with long hair spoke in the starlit void, telling Arhin he was still too weak to absorb his blade's essence. A young man with dark hair stared in disbelief as a glowing blue orb suddenly pulsed to life on his chest. A deafening impact echoed through the darkness, shaking the scene with sudden force. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, knelt before the ghostly figure of Liam Caravan in a room crowded with silent swords. Arhin, kneeling before the glowing figure, quietly acknowledged what he understood. Liam Caravan, calm and accepting, agreed quietly with the unseen figure. Liam Caravan, Arhin's father and mentor, wondered aloud if his body's limitations were all that concerned the other presence in the room. Liam Caravan, calm and contemplative, said he was disappointed but grateful to have found another path. Bluish light washed over weapons and armor as an unseen speaker wondered if there was another path ahead. He reasoned aloud that if his current state makes absorbing strength impossible, he might one day succeed by seeking a sword better suited to him. A young man with dark hair glared forward, blue light sharpening the fierce determination in his eyes. Liam Caravan asked if this opportunity would truly help him become stronger. A mysterious figure, partly lit by blue, suddenly reacted with surprise and quietly wondered what had just happened. In the shadows, a confident and taunting antagonist flashed a wicked grin and remarked that his opponent's cunning already rivaled a swordmaster's. A wise and strategic advisor spoke calmly from beneath the dark beams, explaining it was best to consume a blade that showed plenty of wear. A young man with dark hair kneels in defeat as Liam Caravan levitates above him, his presence commanding the dimly lit room. A mysterious voice demanded to be taken somewhere filled with old, worn-out weapons as the sunset sky burned with dramatic clouds above dark treetops. Dust settled over the shattered remains of wood and stone, sunlight barely slipping through the wreckage in the quiet aftermath. Rubble stretched beneath a blood-red sky, while an unseen presence announced it would choose something suitable from the desolation. A young man with dark hair moved steadily through the ruins, followed by an older figure whose watchful presence lingered just behind him. A tangled mass of splintered wood and discarded weapons vanished into thick mist, swallowing all traces of what once stood here. Liam Caravan glanced around the ruined landscape and remarked that this was a dreary place. Liam Caravan mentioned that all the old items from the slums ended up here, adding that dark mages would find the collection appealing. A mysterious figure stood quietly among broken metal, reflecting that everything here had gone from worthless scrap to useless weapons. Liam Caravan, thoughtful and analytical, floated above the rubble and said this was the best place to find a sword meeting those requirements. Liam Caravan, wise and guiding, floated in midair and told Arhin this would indeed be a good place to begin. A blood-stained sword rested among shattered rocks as someone recalled beginning their journey here, drawn to a blade once gripped by a fallen soldier. A violent man with cold eyes dropped his bloodied axe beside a broken sword, the ground beneath stained from battles no one would soon forget. Shattered spears lay broken in the rubble, and an unseen voice declared they had been destroyed beyond repair. Liam Caravan, a thoughtful and resolute man, looked ahead and quietly admitted he had devoured as many blades as he could. Then, Liam Caravan said he needed to become stronger if he wanted to survive. A young man with dark hair stood in a cluttered scrapyard, clenching his fist as he quietly reflected that the place reminded him of old times. Liam Caravan's eyes burned with determination as he stared straight ahead, every muscle in his face set with unwavering resolve. A smoky sky loomed over a battlefield littered with wooden crosses, while the narrator recalled eras when warriors fought endlessly and spilled blood just to survive. A shining sword caught the light among broken armor as the narrator reflected that many had died, but some managed to survive. A gleaming sword rested atop worn wood, while the narrator recalled the brutal chaos of ancient battlefields. Loss swept through the wreckage, as the narrator reflected that countless lives vanished without a trace in battles like these. Still, the narrator suggested that a rare few stood apart from all the rest. Radiant light flooded the darkness, as if something powerful was waiting to be revealed. A radiant object burned brighter among the ruins, and the narrator spoke of those who left behind a shining light. Then a golden beam carved through the ruined earth, splitting the debris with searing brilliance. A man with intense blue eyes stared straight ahead, his determination clear in every line of his face. A voice from the mist ordered a child to retrieve something important, its tone echoing with authority through the fog. A large hand pointed above Liam Caravan, who looked forward with a serious expression as rubble lay scattered beneath a darkening sky. A glowing sword handle emerged from the darkness. Someone realized this was the second sword. The polished blade caught the faintest glimmer of light, standing out against the shifting darkness. Suddenly, an unknown voice commanded that someone must consume. Then, darkness gave way to a silent, shadow-filled forest as the narrator marked the passage of 1 month. A soft voice quietly reassured that no one else was present beneath the moonlit trees by the still water. A silent mansion stood empty beneath the night sky, and the narrator explained that both the village and its grand halls had been abandoned. 2 figures stepped onto the cold, bluish-lit floor as one wondered aloud if this place was the manor. A single foot crossed the threshold, breaking the silence inside the dimly lit room. Liam Caravan, calm and observant, wondered if a dark mage once used the building for human experiments before abandoning it. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, dismissed the idea that entering the hall would have killed them all if the rumors were true. One of the group guessed that only disgraced nobles might be living here. One observer quietly told the companion that the fine details and decor made the whole place feel unmistakably noble. A cocky and confident antagonist stood grinning with his arms crossed, loudly telling his armed companion they would easily take control of this place. The confident antagonist sat back in his chair and told his companion that with no caretaker around, this job would be easy. A man with a bandana rummaged through his belongings, suddenly stopping as he muttered a confused sound under his breath. A muscular, bald man leaned in and excitedly told his companion that he believed a noblewoman was living inside the building. An observant individual held up a folded dress, remarking with surprise that the lady's clothes seemed freshly packed away. A casual and expressive man jerked upright in shock as the swordsman nearby said nothing compared to the captivating scent of a woman. A pleasure-seeking man with graying hair lifted a frilly cloth to his face, breathing in deeply with a satisfied smile. A hand slid across the waist of a young man with dark hair, fingers searching near his belt. Suddenly, someone tumbled hard onto the floor as a voice demanded a turn to find out what a noblewoman smells like. Then rain streaked down through darkness, washing over the empty scene in heavy silence. A determined and authoritative man stepped forward forcefully, cutting off the confrontation between the surprised swordsman and a worried, startled figure. Arhin, a calm and precise fighter, drove his kick into the aggressive swordsman, sending him recoiling in shock. A mysterious figure slipped through the shadowy doorway, vanishing into the darkness. A mysterious presence stepped into the dim room, remarking that his mother always preferred everything neat and orderly. The mysterious and reflective man said she always grew irritated whenever things were left untidy. A calm but firm man spoke from the darkness, warning the unseen listener to put the object down. Liam Caravan, calm and assertive, suggested they sit down and talk things through instead. A bald man stood in the grand hall, his voice hesitant as he addressed the 3 silent figures watching him. The bald man, a menacing figure, asked the bearded man if the kid walking ahead was the owner's son, while the bearded man muttered in frustration. A figure hidden in the shadows demanded to know if Arhin was there to scavenge for food or needed a place to stay. A mysterious figure lingered in the darkness, quietly weighing whether the answer would be one of 2 possible choices. Liam Caravan, calm and composed, told his unseen guest that he might consider showing hospitality as their host. A bald man with a sharp gaze snapped that he couldn't believe the nonsense he was hearing. A threatening young man with dark hair narrowed his eyes and warned that his opponent would soon regret acting so arrogant. A muscular bald man stomped the stone floor, his heavy step echoing through the dim, cavernous hall. A tense figure walked into the dim room as a hostile young man gripped his weapon and sneered that he should have stayed hidden. Liam Caravan, a focused and determined man, glared forward with piercing blue eyes, his resolve hardening in the tense quiet. A closed eye rested beneath tangled hair, the moment suspended in gentle stillness. The fierce and aggressive antagonist swung his massive weapon overhead, shouting that he was about to crush his opponent. A young man with silver and black hair drove his glowing blade into the large swordsman's back, catching the powerful fighter completely off guard. A young man with silver and black hair stared straight ahead, unwavering determination burning in his eyes. An intense close-up revealed a young man with silver and black hair as flames danced around his glowing, fiery eye. Blood splattered against the alley walls as an aggressive antagonist drove his blade into the victim of a sudden attack, who reeled in shock. With a brutal surge, the strong young man hurled his adversary against the wall, the impact echoing through the tense silence. A dark sword tore downward as the aggressive antagonist unleashed a surge of power, sending ripples of ominous energy through the air. A suspicious young man with an intense gaze challenged the unseen group, saying he knew they were not simply wanderers seeking shelter. A suffering young man clutched his stomach as blood spilled from his lips, agony twisting his features. Blood sprayed across the panel as Liam Caravan was struck, his glowing blue eye flashing with defiance. Blood splattered across the chest of a determined young man as he grimaced, bearing a defiant smile despite the fresh wound. A black screen signaled the end, leaving the promise that the story would continue. Flames roared and crackled as fire consumed everything in its path. Suddenly, a pile of firewood erupted into bright, hungry flames. The hearth blazed with warmth as a young man with dark hair and his silent companion sat quietly, watching the fire together. Liam Caravan, a loyal and respectful man, addressed the master with quiet reverence as his silent companion stood beside him in the fiery glow. Liam Caravan glanced at the glowing sword in Arhan's hands and wondered aloud if this was truly the next blade he was meant to consume. A young man with dark hair clenched his fist, thinking it should become something more than just a sword. A glowing sword stood upright, sparks crackling around its blade as a menacing figure raised it higher with unwavering determination. Sparks floated around as an unseen hand gripped the short sword, noting aloud that it resembled a short sword more than a dagger. Then, an older man with a beard examined the thin blade and remarked that trying to cut anything with it would surely cause it to break. Liam Caravan calmly lifted Arhan with the rope and said he was ready. Liam Caravan's intense gaze held steady as he reflected that a weapon was never meant to simply cut down or crush an enemy by force. Liam Caravan, wise and authoritative, explained in a low voice that the weapon existed for a single purpose. Smoke drifted around a mysterious man's upper torso as a glowing burn mark pulsed on his chest in the dim light. A sharp object flashed downward as a menacing man with a drawn weapon aimed a deadly stab at a young man lying helpless and exposed. Rain streaked down a tense young man's neck as he braced himself, thinking this was a moment where life and death would be decided. A hooded young man brought his blade down with force, striking his adversary in the dark forest. The sword pierced straight through the young man with dark hair, blood splattering as the attacker's strike landed with lethal force. A single, razor-sharp blade stood upright as the swordsman stated this weapon was forged solely to pierce. A single drop of blood struck the earth, echoing the violence that had just unfolded. Liam Caravan looked up at the sword, quietly wondering if it was truly designed only for piercing. Then, the swordsman gripped his blade tightly, asking if a spear might be better and noting the silent agreement in his opponent's eyes. Liam Caravan, a confident older man, told Arhan he believed spears would suit that purpose better. A young man with dark hair flinched as a calm stranger told him it was natural to doubt. A mysterious and ominous figure raised the blade, explaining that memories within it would serve someone with a frail body better than physical strength. A focused and determined figure spoke quietly about who truly possessed that blade. A dignified older man stood beneath the dark wooden ceiling, reflecting quietly that a single warrior had killed over 200 enemies before dying. Liam, a dignified older man, held his sword defensively and asked Arhan if he was unharmed. A small, fragile-bodied woman stood with her back exposed as a menacing figure leveled a sword behind her in silence. A young man with dark hair gripped the glowing sword with steady hands, focus sharpening as tension filled the air around him. A man with gray hair bowed deeply, telling those present to show respect to the sword before them. He intently watched the forge, flames crackling as their heat reflected in his focused eyes. Firelight flickered across the stone as an unseen voice urged those present to accept what was given and consume it with gratitude. A foot stepped forward on cracked stone, and an unseen voice reflected that true strength carries a dignity beyond what most can imagine. A determined young man with dark hair gripped the sword blade, holding it steadily in the heart of the roaring forge fire. A heavy silence lingered as a distant voice declared that someone had inherited the memories of the woman. He stood silently before the blazing furnace, its heat flickering against his face as he weighed something only he could name. A warning echoed through the gloom as an unseen voice promised that difficult lessons awaited. A dark void filled the frame as two swords crossed behind the title, announcing the legend of the sword-eating swordmaster. Faint embers glowed in the shadows, filling the silence with an ominous crackle. Then the cracked earth pulsed with fiery light as flames danced and sparks leapt in the darkness. A house burned fiercely, smoke and embers swirling into the night as a girl remembered nothing but the fire consuming everything she knew. Flames raged higher, swallowing the house as embers scattered through the air. A shadowy voice asked if Mary was awake, the question hanging heavy in the darkness. A bandaged young woman with long red hair slowly blinked, her weary gaze lingering as the somber silence deepened around her. A young girl with tousled hair slowly opened her eyes, realizing in that instant that everything she once knew had changed forever. Flames consumed 2 bodies beyond recognition, and a voice recounted how her parents could not even be identified. Smoke and fire raged through the ruins as the voice explained that only she lived through the blaze, and even that survival was barely possible. Then, a vulnerable young woman curled on the ground, shielding herself as the flames closed in. A woman's faint voice drifted through the darkness, her words nearly lost in the hush. A red-haired woman lay weakened in bed as an elderly man, holding a basket, watched in silence from the shadows. 2 dark-cloaked figures stood silently beside the open tomb, and one of them reflected that he had perished alongside the others. Then, the narrator explained that after losing everything, the girl was sent away to a crumbling orphanage. A tall statue of a woman holding a flame stood watch over the quiet town square, symbolizing the moment her discovery changed everything. Sunlight poured over the stone goddess as the children remembered the orphanage worshipped her as their savior. She heard the narrator say she was forced to stay trapped inside her trauma. A solitary woman with pink hair stood before the mirror, her thoughts echoing that fire had taken everything from her. A young woman with purple hair looked down, feeling as if she could never escape the flames that still trapped her. A scarred young woman with red hair stood quietly in the dim light, her expression set and unyielding. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, bathing the cathedral in quiet colors as the narration lingered on the days she had spent within these walls. A mysterious and authoritative speaker addressed the gathered audience, reflecting that their past had been marked by peace but also by harsh violence. Liam Caravan, a worried man with dark hair, quietly wondered what had happened to the scarred woman's face. Liam, inquisitive and thoughtful, whispered to Arhin that the scarred woman had been cursed by the goddess, leaving Arhin to quietly ask if that caused her scar. An anxious woman clasped her hands tightly, saying she got chills just from looking at whatever stood before them. Ominous whispers filled the air, as unseen voices called something before them hideous and an abomination. A lone figure with reddish hair sat in silence, while someone behind them whispered the word monster. A calculating and menacing man glared forward, his red eyes burning with silent threat. Rain hammered down as desperate hands pressed together in prayer, and someone whispered in their mind that they wished for everything to end. Shadows drifted across a black haze as a young man with dark hair tried to will himself away from the sting of losing. Moonlight filtered through restless leaves, and someone wished they could outrun the memory of fire and the scorn that marked them forever. A determined and focused warrior lifts his gleaming sword, thinking that his soul burns brighter with every waking moment. Someone gripped a sword hilt tightly, promising themselves that everything would change when that fateful day finally arrived. A young man with dark hair flinched, his eyes wide and anxious as shock took hold. A shining blade caught the moonlight as a menacing man brandished his sword against the night sky. A hand swung the blade wide against the star-filled sky, and the swordsman thought he needed to find a way to endure. Light flared from the sword's blade, and the swordsman whispered that it was the only comfort he had left. A focused young man with dark hair drew back his sword and attacked, while a terrified figure watched from the shadows of the forest. A sword beam cut through the night as the focused swordsman remembered that mastering the blade was the only path forward. He remembered how the skills he learned were rough but said they were just enough, and quietly recalled that his teacher was called Hedgel. A weary and reflective former knight let out a long breath, remembering his years wandering before working at the orphanage. A hesitant and introspective woman thought she never would have dared to approach a man who looked that stern. Moments later, an unknown figure stepped forward under the night sky. A respectful, admiring man stands in the misty forest and asks the silent figure before him how he can become like him. A nervous girl steps closer to the man in the dark forest and asks if he will finally give her the answer she seeks. A determined young man with reddish hair clenched his fists and asked if Liam Caravan would teach him. A clenched fist trembled with resolve as the character insisted they did whatever was necessary to survive. A silent and contemplative attentive man holds his gaze, lost in thought. A derisive voice told Mary that swordsmanship was useless for someone like her as they faced each other in the shadowy forest. A resolute young man stared ahead, his voice warning an unseen opponent that pushing further would only bring harm. A regretful woman with red hair quietly told someone off-panel to leave, wishing she could have learned to wield a sword herself. A red-haired woman with one eye hidden by her hair pulled a mask over her face beneath the quiet night sky. A reflective young man with dark hair covered part of his face with his hand, clouds drifting behind him in the pale sky. A bandaged woman with red hair gazed at the stars, quietly wondering what this world would be like without fire. A tense figure clutched their chest, admitting through clenched teeth that this was the only thing capable of truly frightening them. Then a cloaked figure darted through the shadowy forest, every motion silent except for the sharp swish cutting through the night. In the moonlit clearing, a determined man with dark hair gripped his sword, facing a pink-haired girl who stood calmly across from him. Leaves drifted silently through the night air, their slow descent softening the stillness beneath the dark forest canopy. A figure stood motionless in the dim light, hands resting at their waist as the silence deepened around them. A wooden barrel hit the floor with a heavy clunk as someone demanded that a choice be made. A serious man with dark hair stood by the barrel and said he could teach the way forward. A young man with dark hair studies a row of swords, his gaze sharp and unwavering. A young man with dark hair hesitantly asked if he really needed to swing the weapon. Liam Caravan crossed his arms and demanded to know what the red-haired individual planned to do with the sword, if not wield it. A hand reached upward, fingers trembling against the wooden floor in the tense silence. A determined and wounded fighter gripped the sword, her bandaged hands steady as she told herself she could keep going as long as she could fight. A defeated and vulnerable young man lay face down as a dominant swordsman loomed over him, sword raised in a silent, menacing threat. A calm man with long hair stood unfazed, arms crossed, while a sword was leveled at him from above. A stern man with narrowed eyes fixed his gaze on the gleaming tip of the sword pointed straight at him. Arhin, confident and resolute despite injury, accepted the challenge and said anything would do as the glowing sword hovered overhead. A mysterious figure gripped a metallic object, tension crackling in the air as anticipation built for the next decisive move. Blood splattered across the floor as a young man with dark hair struck out, wielding a blade for the very first time. Blood splatters across the young man's face as he stares ahead, his cold expression betraying no fear. A menacing swordsman accused Arhin and Liam Caravan of being outlaws, his voice echoing through the darkness with a chilling certainty. The bald swordsman staggered backward, bleeding and gripping a small dagger as shock flickered in his eyes. Arhin, a calm and dominant young man, stands unfazed as the defeated swordsman crashes hard to the ground. Then a heavy silence pressed in, swallowing every sound and leaving only darkness. Arhin, injured but defiant, tries to push himself upright as Liam and the swordsman approach through the dim light. Shock flickered across Arhin's face while Liam Caravan's anxious eyes darted through the gloom. Liam Caravan, a middle-aged man gripped by panic, stammered out his confusion as the swordsman watched him with tense suspicion. Liam Caravan stared wide-eyed at Arhin and said he couldn't believe what was happening. Liam Caravan swung his glowing sword with fury, declaring that the offer was finished. A young man with dark hair knelt on the stone floor, blood pooling beneath him as another figure watched from the shadows. A mysterious figure floated in a haze of pale light, while Arhin watched from the shadows, tense and alert. An older man with a white beard stood by the window, reflecting aloud that he had focused on teaching the child a single lesson all month. Arhin dashed forward with determination, while Liam Caravan stood calmly in the background, watching his every move. Liam Caravan, an older man with gray hair and a beard, explained that he only taught Arhin how to build endurance, not swordsmanship. Liam Caravan, an older man with gray hair and a beard, stepped forward and gestured anxiously toward the calm, authoritative figure standing before him. Liam Caravan, an older man with gray hair and a beard, reflected aloud on the remarkable precision it took to stab someone so accurately. A thoughtful, observant figure studied Arhin's form and quietly remarked that it meant his body was truly absorbing the sword. A determined hand gripped the sword tightly, and the speaker demanded to see proof from the noble descendant. A glowing voice declared that this would be the first step on Arhin's path as the heir of House Caravan. Liam Caravan, a focused and resolute warrior, aligned his gleaming sword before his face, his intense gaze fixed straight ahead. A mysterious hand tightened around the cylinder as the words "to be continued" echoed, leaving the outcome uncertain. Arhin lunged at the swordsman, determined to stop him, as Liam Caravan shouted a warning and the swordsman taunted that they'd have to catch him first. A wounded intruder, a menacing man groaning in pain, muttered that he had just stabbed the intruder before collapsing with a gasp. Blood sprayed from the mouth of a man with wide, shocked eyes as he gasped in agony. A severely injured man trembled as he clutched his ribs, muttering that the blade had struck precisely between two of them. Blood pooled beneath the injured man as he struggled to breathe, realizing the weapon had punctured his lung. Liam, a reflective older man, stood solemnly in the grand hall and admitted he had neither sword skills nor battle experience. He wondered how he managed such precise aim with the attack, quietly admitting he had never been able to do it before. A shimmering pink mist billowed outward as someone recalled that these were the memories belonging to Mary. A male hand gripped the sword hilt tightly as red smoke coiled and thickened around the blade. Red energy flared in the intense eye of a stranger as they revealed a connection to the previous owner of the consumed needle. Blue and red light split across the calm face of a young man with dark hair as he stood resolute, a glowing aura swirling around him. A shadowy figure in a sinister mask loomed through swirling red and black mist, radiating menace. Then everything shifted after that day. Sunlight filtered softly through the forest as the narrator quietly recalled having learned many things from Hedgel. A red-haired girl steadied her sword toward a calm, authoritative mentor in the forest as she remembered learning how to wield it in battle. Liam Caravan, a firm and instructive man, grabbed Arhin's arm and stressed the importance of learning how to survive. Then a swift blur cut through the snowy darkness, leaving only the sound of movement echoing between the trees. A sword gleamed against the snowy forest, and the narrator recalled learning unorthodox techniques that embodied the free-spirited knight called Hedgel. A serious man with a fur-collared coat stood alone in the snow, arms crossed, contemplating the forest's silence. He exhaled, calm and steady, as memories of a girl who once feared fire drifted through his mind in the cold air. A man with an aggressive stance lunged forward, driving his blade straight at a defensive young man in the snowy forest. A young man with dark hair swung his sword forward with fierce determination against the bright sky. A pair of fur-lined boots held steady as the tip of the sword pressed into the earth, the swordsman's courage echoing louder than any words. A young woman with red hair smiled with confidence, her voice hinting that something powerful had changed within her. Liam Caravan stood in the snowy forest, his serious gaze fixed ahead as silence settled over the trees. Admiration for his swordsmanship grew, and years quietly slipped by as the story edged toward a new chapter. Dust hung thick in the air as unseen figures began to cough, their hacking sounds echoing through the heavy mist. A serious and reflective older man lay in bed, telling the quiet girl Mary that she would leave this place one day. A supportive and earnest hand grasped the hand of an emotional young man, as a quiet plea for help hung in the air. An exhausted and serious figure struggled for breath, urging someone to venture into the world and accept this as their final lesson. An exhausted young man with dark hair lay on the floor panting, and managed to say this was all he could give. A tearful woman with long reddish hair expressed her gratitude, saying she was glad to have met this person at her journey's end. A gentle voice addressed Mary, lingering in the quiet as a reddish-haired figure leaned close, their words carrying a touch of tenderness. She held on tightly, her bruised face streaked with tears as she clung to the only comfort left beside her. A hand lay motionless in the darkness, and someone quietly offered their thanks for everything. A young man with dark hair sat silently beside the bed, watching over the figure resting under dim light. A solemn voice told Hedgel to find peace, echoing quietly through the darkness. He remembered deciding to leave the orphanage behind, determined to fulfill Hedgel's final wish. Blood slid from the blade's tip, and a solemn voice spoke of setting out on a new journey into the world. A single drop of blood fell through the darkness, landing with a soft echo against the silent tree line. A group of hostile men loomed over a young man with reddish hair, sprawled on the ground and unable to defend himself. A young man with dark hair stood over his defeated foe, thinking he had quickly earned a reputation for himself. He remembered how, as a mercenary, he always chose a thin sword that felt almost like a needle in his grip. Some believed her reputation came from her unusual weapon, or the fact she was a young woman among mercenaries, but she was called something else. In the darkness of the forest, a prepared-for combat man gripped the hilt of his sword with unwavering determination. A focused female warrior with sharp eyes lifts a slender sword before her face, her title echoing in the silence, the Needle Maiden. A calm, composed man hangs by a thin wire, while a menacing figure looms behind in the ominous shadows. A focused young man with dark hair narrowed his gaze as he realized this was the absorption his master had described. A pair of intense eyes flashed close as heavy footsteps echoed, signaling that someone was drawing near. A bloodshot eye widened as a young man with dark hair felt Mary's memories echo sharply in his mind. A wounded, terrified, bald man lay sprawled across the ornate hall floor, begging his attacker to stop and pleading desperately for mercy. A desperate and vulnerable figure stretched out a trembling hand, begging for mercy from someone just out of view. A hand gripped the sword's hilt, and the swordsman drew the blade with a swift, practiced motion as Liam Caravan pleaded for mercy. A desperate figure reached out, begging for their life as the word stab echoed in the air. The aggressive swordsman drove his blade down, blood splattering as he stabbed his prone opponent without hesitation. Bare feet struck the earth with a sharp impact, landing hard and fast in the tense silence that followed the violent clash. Blood trickled onto the dirt, each drop deepening the silence left in the wake of violence. A young man with dark hair drove a sword through his own neck, his expression unwavering as he reminded himself to always confirm the kill. A swordsman rammed his blade through the torso of a dark figure, blood spraying as pain twisted the young man's face. The title, the Sword-Eating Swordmaster, appeared in stark lettering, two crossed blades glinting behind it against the darkness. A pale blonde-haired man stood motionless in the dim hallway, blood trailing from his lips. A conflicted young man kneels, his thin sword dripping blood, as he quietly admits this is the first time he has killed another person. Still, Arhin wondered aloud why he felt nothing inside. He wondered aloud if his actions felt strangely familiar, as though he had carried them out many times before. Liam Caravan, a calm older man, stands over Arhin's bloodied body while a massive sword hangs ominously above them. A hand gripped the sword hilt tightly in the darkness as Arhin explained he had exploited his opponent's weakness because he was underestimated. A wounded man with tears and a desperate expression lay on the blood-stained floor, whispering that he might not survive being so badly outnumbered again. Liam Caravan, a calm older man, squinted as he thought they should realize this advantage too. Confusion churned in the darkness as he wondered aloud why they weren't attacking. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, gripped his dagger while the swordsman readied his staff, both prepared for a sudden clash in the shadowy hall. The bearded swordsman braced himself with his staff, locking eyes with Liam Caravan, who calmly prepared to engage. Then a hollow voice filled the mist, declaring that fear had taken hold. In the tense silence, Arhin stayed deep in thought while Liam Caravan, his father, watched him closely with a hand covering his mouth. Liam Caravan, perceptive and analytical, told Arhin that his recent movement was far too skilled to belong to a beginner. Liam Caravan, cautious and reflective, explained that a little fear could protect someone, but too much would only cloud their judgment. Liam Caravan, a fearful and panicked man, trembled as he asked Arhin what to do, and Arhin angrily snapped that he didn't know either. A determined mouth drew in sharp breaths, and the speaker insisted that fear made an opponent seem larger than life. A chilling voice revealed that in this moment, all hope had been stripped away. Liam covered his mouth, his voice low as he insisted that these scums must witness what was about to happen. A menacing man with a blade raised his sword in a poised stance, ready to strike against the blood-red backdrop. A lone foot pressed down into the swirling red darkness, and a voice spoke about possessing the skills and lethality of an assassin. Blood dripped from the wounded man's mouth as he quietly acknowledged the situation, his voice steady despite the pain. A surge of energy streaked down, slamming into the ground with a violent impact that sent debris flying in all directions. A blade sliced through the air as the aggressive antagonist delivered a fierce, rapid attack. Arhin, a determined young man with dark hair, swung his sword downward as Liam and the swordsman snapped their attention to the sudden attack. Arhin, a determined young man with dark hair, led the charge and declared that now was the moment to strike. Arhin, cocky and confident, glared at his opponent as the swordsman's face twisted with shock and fear. A desperate and aggressive young man shouted a warning, threatening to kill anyone who dared to come closer. A muscular man strained to bring his heavy weapon down as a blonde-haired character ducked swiftly beneath the attack. The aggressive swordsman surged forward, driving his knee upward in a fierce, punishing strike. The fierce and aggressive swordsman swung his weapon down with a roar, calling his opponent a little rat as he attacked. The dominant and aggressive fighter slammed his foot into a struggling young man with dark hair, sending him flying backward across the ground. A young man with dark hair glared forward, blue eyes blazing as he readied himself to launch a swift, decisive attack. A single, terrified eye snapped wide open as a sudden rush of motion filled the air. Arhan spoke with determination, telling Liam Caravan that bringing up the past would not change anything. Liam Caravan lunged forward and stabbed at his unseen opponent with focused precision. Blood streamed from the neck of a young man with dark hair as the swordsman's attack left him reeling, pain sharpening his focus. A blade pierced the white fabric as blood dripped down, marking the moment the aggressive swordsman stabbed the wounded young man with dark hair. A single blood droplet hung in the air as a young man with dark hair widened his eye, shock flickering across his face. A young man with dark hair murmured that Hedgel had once taught him something important. The swordsman yanked Liam Caravan backward with a spear, his grip unyielding as the clash echoed through the dark battlefield. A determined young man with dark hair gripped his sword tightly, admitting aloud that time was running against him. Someone screamed as a blur of motion cut through the chaos, unleashing a sudden, forceful attack. Liam Caravan, panicked and desperate, tightened his grip on the sword as he braced for the next attack. A powerful leg slammed downward, the force of the kick threatening to shatter anything beneath it. A menacing man swung his sword with fierce speed, the blade slicing through the air in a single, decisive motion. The swordsman, an aggressive and violent antagonist, lunged forward and swung his blade, forcing a young man with dark hair to dodge swiftly. Liam Caravan, in a desperate fall, tumbled downward through the darkness, clutching his dagger as he braced for what waited below. A young man with dark hair lunged forward, his weapon aimed straight at his enemy as determination burned in his eyes. Steel flashed as the swordsman drove his blade forward, stabbing Arhan and leaving him reeling in shock. Still, Arhan launched an upward sword strike at the swordsman, who met the attack with a focused block. Then, a pair of legs blurred past in a burst of speed. Someone dashed forward, the tension in the air sharpening with each step. Pain contorted the young man's face as he let out a strained gasp, eyes wide with agony. A young man with dark hair plummeted through the air, sword raised high as a frantic scream tore from his throat. Blood splattered as the aggressive swordsman drove his blade straight through the arm of the young man with dark hair. The narrator stressed that only the first two moves truly mattered, urging immediate action instead of seeking gradual improvement. Rain pattered as the young man with dark hair knelt among fallen foes, gripping his shining sword and silently resolving to master every skill he possessed. The aggressive swordsman raised his blade and swung down at Arhan, who reached out defensively from the ground. The aggressive swordsman, a menacing figure, lunged forward and delivered a fierce sword swing without hesitation. The menacing swordsman unleashed another furious swing, his aggression cutting through the air. With a calm, confident expression, a young man with dark hair smoothly dodged the fast attack and remarked that his flexibility was a natural gift. He gripped the sword tightly, thinking his body felt nimble and wondering what that meant for his next move. Then, a fist slammed into the swordsman's torso with crushing force. A focused young man's eye glinted with determination as he observed every possible angle, searching for the right position to strike. A flash of motion cut through the air as a focused young man executed a sharp, decisive slash. Still, an agile figure twisted midair, launching a powerful upside-down kick toward their unseen opponent. A determined young man slashed his sword downward, aiming for his opponent's legs in a swift, calculated attack. Then, a blinding whoosh ripped downward, the air splitting under the force of something fast and unseen. A fierce young man with dark hair lunged downward, eyes wide with intensity, aiming a brutal attack at an unseen target. A distressed and determined man gripped the upright sword as swirling mist curled around the blade. A blade plunged down from above, and a menacing antagonist stabbed a shocked man in the head. Blood streamed down the face of a desperate man as he impaled himself with a sword, agony etched across his features. A young man with dark hair steadied himself, red orbs swirling around his chest as he focused and resolved to finish off his enemy. A bloodshot eye filled the frame as a wounded man struggled to choke back his pain. A menacing figure gripped his sword tighter. The sound of metal striking echoed through the tense air. A menacing figure drove two thin daggers into the back of an injured young man, blood pooling beneath him as the attack landed. The swordsman, calm and looming, stood over his fallen enemy with a bloodied blade as Liam Caravan gasped in disbelief at the scene. The swordsman, a powerful adversary, tried to steady his trembling blade and muttered a curse under his breath. The swordsman, fearful and tense, gripped the trembling knife tightly and muttered that he just needed one more moment. A shadowed figure at the edge of the chaos whispered in confusion, struggling to make sense of the presence before them. A young man with dark hair glared forward, his eye glowing with determination as the line between shadow and light split across his face. Someone in the darkness blurted out that only a maniac could do what they just witnessed. Arhan and the swordsman clashed blades, each refusing to yield as the swordsman taunted, and Arhan declared this would be the end. Then the wind stirred the leaves as the moon cast pale light through tangled branches. A heavy thud echoed through the moonlit clearing, breaking the hush beneath the tangled branches. Liam Caravan, a focused and determined man, dug steadily into the earth with his shovel while Arhan watched in calm silence nearby. Liam Caravan, calm and guiding, asked if Arhan had managed to rid himself of doubts. An intense eye locked onto the movement as a voice warned that a body that never tires could swing a sword from dawn until dusk. A mysterious hand hovered above the soil, and a low voice suggested that getting rid of something would be effortless. A furious older man with wild eyes shouted up from the rocky ledge, while a younger figure stood over him, silent and imposing. A veiled figure questioned whether Liam Caravan truly believed he could face 4 thugs alone, reminding him of what it meant to bear the Caravan name. Liam Caravan, a wise mentor with a gray beard, told his companion they would become stronger when their life was truly at risk. A young man with dark hair stood silent in the shadows, thinking to himself that Master Liam's warnings had all turned out to be real. A hand gripped the chest of the young man with dark hair as he glanced away, tension tightening every muscle. A young man with dark hair blocked the swordsman's attack, just as a vision of a glowing, half-demon woman flickered in his mind. His body moved with sudden grace, each step as fluid as a seasoned dancer. Arhan, bruised but unyielding, reflected that he now understood a little more than before as embers floated around his determined face. Then Arhan lunged upward with intense focus, his sword aimed straight at the towering swordsman. Arhan, thoughtful and introspective, realized quietly that true courage meant standing against the world, just as his master once tried to teach him. A calm and introspective young man closes his eyes, shutting out the world for a single, silent moment. Flames curled around the weapon's handle as someone reflected that their strength kept growing with every deeper connection to its former owner. Fiery light twisted as the blade vanished into the swirling vortex, and someone realized they were witnessing the true power of absorbing a sword. An older man with gray hair and a beard addressed someone quietly, calling out to his child as dusk settled around them. Liam Caravan, an older man with gray hair and a beard, declared he never lied about the sword and needed to share something important. Liam Caravan floated above the ground and warned Arhan that endless suffering awaited him in the days to come. Swirling dark red and black energy filled the void as an unseen voice warned that today's ordeal would seem mild compared to what lies ahead. A sweeping slash of white energy tore through the darkness as a menacing swordsman unleashed a fierce, unstoppable attack. Liam Caravan, a solemn man in the shadows, asked if Arhan would continue down this difficult path. A solitary young man with dark hair stood silently in the clearing, his back turned to the mysterious light filtering through the forest. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, lowered his head and thought he could endure anything if it meant one day facing Carlos. He clenched his fists against the open sky and insisted that he would walk any path necessary. Liam Caravan, his features set with determination, spoke with a force that left the air in the clearing tense and unyielding. A tense voice called out for Master, the urgency breaking through the heavy silence. Liam Caravan's face twisted with anxiety, sweat beading as distress overtook him. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, struggled to catch his breath while Liam Caravan stood over him, watching with calm intensity. Arhan leaned against the wall, panting, as he nervously asked if Liam was truly certain. 2 figures dangled above a jagged cliff, silent and tense, as one of them struggled to process what was happening. Birds wheeled around a lone tree tree atop a sunlit hill, their calls echoing across the bright sky. The cliffside crumbled beneath a young man with dark hair and an older, stoic figure as rocks tumbled into the yawning void below. The tree trembled as a deep rumble echoed through the open sky. Something unseen was drawing closer. A confident, menacing figure hovered beside the young man with dark hair, challenging him by asking if this was truly the right path. Mist swirled below the jagged cliff's edge, hiding the distant mountains and leaving the valley shrouded in uneasy silence. Dust and smoke swallowed everything, hanging thick in the air as small debris drifted through the chaos. A glowing title appeared, swords crossing in a circle of light, as the legend of the sword-eating swordmaster began. Liam Caravan, a confident older man with a beard, taunted Arhan and remarked that his determination had faded, replaced by doubts. A young man with dark hair struggled for breath as a firm hand pinned him in place. Liam, a supportive mentor figure, nodded in approval and told Arhan he had been doing well as the trainee climbed the wall. Arhan, tense and conflicted, hesitated as he thought he should eventually speak up about the secret weighing on his mind. A knowledgeable instructor explained to Arhan that he would now share the knowledge he sought, starting with an overview of the 5 stages of swordsmanship. A cold mist crept across the darkness as the narrator stated that every swordsman must begin at the earliest stage, known as sword novice. 3 cloaked novices stood on a vertical wall, while a narrator explained that only those with exceptional talent could advance to the level of sword walker. A lone, cloaked figure stood illuminated, as the narrator explained that those who advanced their powers and gained fame in battle became known as sword runners. A figure in heavy armor moved with purpose toward a cloaked presence, while the narrator explained that the strongest among them were called sword experts. In a dimly lit space, a young man with dark hair clenched his fist, determination burning in his lowered gaze. Now the narrator spoke of those held in highest esteem, individuals revered by many as gods. Then the narrator proclaimed that one swordsman reigned supreme above all others. A line of armored knights knelt with swords planted on the ground, while Arhan and others bowed behind them in quiet reverence. A radiant sword-shaped light exploded against the darkness as the narrator declared that the ones who awakened the heart of the sword stood apart. Light streaked down from the clouds, bathing the barren mountains as a distant voice thundered the word that marked legends. Shadows stretched across the empty hall as an unseen voice asked the uncertain young man which of these stages he thought he belonged to. Liam Caravan, sweating and tense, glanced sideways and asked if someone was hoping for comforting words. A young man with dark hair smirked and said he understood exactly where his abilities stood right now. A mystical blue aura spiraled upward as the unseen narrator explained that mastering mana was essential for anyone aspiring to become a swordmaster. A faceless figure gathered glowing energy in their chest, explaining that the second heart was a place to store mana. Then, the enigmatic being hovered serenely as they revealed this force was also known as the mana heart. Exhausted, Arhan leaned against the rocky wall and told Liam Caravan he hadn't awakened a mana heart, so he wasn't even considered a novice yet. A confident, condescending antagonist stood on jagged stone and mocked Arhan, telling him he was right to admit he was still just a greenhorn. The older man's smirk deepened as he taunted that Arhan had barely begun to understand what it meant to be a swordsman. A trembling hand gripped the rough stone as someone explained that this training was only meant to raise him to the level of a novice. A figure with an uncertain face halted sharply as someone explained the next step was to form a mana heart. Liam Caravan, a stern-faced man, stared in disbelief and asked what he had just heard. Liam Caravan crossed his arms under the bright sky, asking if he was truly putting his life on the line for this. The young man with dark hair muttered that even a small mistake while forming the mana heart could be deadly. A young man with dark hair clings desperately to the crumbling ledge, his fingers digging in as the ground threatens to give way beneath him. A hand slammed down with a sharp clack, and someone admitted they weren't sure how things worked in the Master's era. Now, some claimed anyone could gain a mana heart just by drinking an alchemist's potion. A heavily armored swordsman loomed over the unconscious young man, blue light casting his presence as a silent threat. Then, a glowing mechanical hand settled on the shoulder of a calm young man in dark clothing. Liam Caravan, a playful man with a glowing sword, teased the confident pink-haired woman about women barely learning to defend themselves with a blade. A young man with dark hair gripped the rough stone wall, wondering aloud why he had had to endure such extreme training methods. Still gripping the cracked wall, the struggling figure wondered aloud if there was a much easier way. Still grimacing, the struggling young man clenched his teeth and muttered that he truly couldn't understand what was happening. An older man with a beard crossed his arms and explained that forming a mana heart isn't actually a complicated process. Liam Caravan, standing tall against the sky, stated that the blood of Caravan carries the unyielding strength of steel. A shocked and focused eye filled the frame as an unseen voice revealed that extraordinary power demands a strong vessel. Blue energy surged as an unknown voice warned that an ordinary man's body would never withstand what was coming. A calm older man with a white beard sits cross-legged, blue light swirling around him as his presence radiates quiet strength. A wise mentor figure spoke solemnly, explaining that a human heart limits one to ordinary potential unless they truly aim for the rank of swordmaster. A bright flash lit up the intense eye of Liam Caravan as power surged within him. A chilling voice delivered a warning, telling the unseen listener they must gain an unbreakable heart to withstand every force in the world. A metallic heart pulsed with radiant energy, its presence signaling the arrival of something both powerful and ominous. A solitary foot descended through swirling blue mist as an unseen speaker insisted there was only one way forward. A close-up revealed an older man with a mustache as he warned that constant danger was the only way forward. Arhin, a young man determined to grow stronger, climbed the steep rock wall while Liam Caravan explained the body would eventually require a mana heart. A heavily armored swordsman stood silently beside his sheathed blade, reflecting that only a handful of his own descendants had ever completed this training. A wounded and struggling man in blood-stained armor dropped to his knees near a sword, his exhaustion spreading across the shattered ground. A clenched hand pressed into the dirt, every muscle shaking from the strain of an ordeal that seemed endless. Then, the narrator explained that only those who endured every stage of training could truly reach the end. A quiet night sky shimmered with streaks of blue light, casting a mystical glow over the shadowed trees below. Two cloaked figures stood together beneath the glowing sky, gazing upward in quiet awe as the narrator revealed that they eventually became swordmasters. A calm voice broke the silence as someone asked the young man with dark hair what he thought beneath the star-filled sky. A young man with dark hair pressed his hands against a cracked wall, tense, and quietly wondered if this was really happening. Someone flicked an object with a sharp snap and asked if that was supposed to motivate him. Fingers tightened against splintered wood, tension radiating from the unseen figure's clenched hand. Then, a resolute hand cut through the air as its owner replied with unwavering commitment that they were more dedicated than ever, sir. Still, the fierce and determined young man pressed his grip into the earth, channeling every ounce of resolve through his trembling fingers. A hand pressed firmly against the cracked stone, tension building in the silent moment. Liam Caravan, his eyes unwavering, stated that he never lies when it comes to anything related to the sword. Liam Caravan, a confident and encouraging mentor, grinned as he told them their mana heart would be unlike any other. Liam Caravan smirked with quiet confidence, the bright sky stretching wide above the rugged terrain. Sunlight poured over the cracked cliff as the narrator insisted that no one else would ever have something quite like this. Several rocks tumbled from the cracked wall, breaking the silence that lingered after Liam's confident words. Clouds drifted past a brilliant full moon, casting shifting silver light over the quiet landscape. A calm night settled over the quiet town of Campbell, nestled in the eastern Verde region beneath looming mountains and drifting clouds. The empty town square glowed softly beneath streetlights, with a single large tree standing watch over the silent, sleeping buildings. A wooden signboard with a picture symbol glowed under warm light as someone asked if the rumors about Caravan Village to the west had reached anyone. Inside the dim tavern, Liam Caravan asked what the others thought about the deserted, dreary land abandoned a year ago. An ominous bearer of a mysterious rumor leaned in and quietly told the others that something strange was said to be hidden in the western village. Liam Caravan, confused and inquisitive, turned to Arhin and asked what mysterious thing could possibly be hidden out there. Liam Caravan, wary and cautious, told Arhin he had no idea what was out there, but warned it had to be dangerous since no men ever returned. A single tear slid down the cheek of a sorrowful young man with dark hair as he quietly explained that those people vanished forever. A mysterious informant gripped a cup, sharing that someone claimed a wave of monsters had survived the Watchers of the North and destroyed the village. Another voice added that rumors spoke of a dark mage performing terrible experiments there, but everyone agreed something truly dangerous was hidden in that place. In the shadows, a hunched figure warned that anyone who valued their life should avoid the village to the west. A cloaked figure sat silently on a wooden chair, the sword nearby hinting at concealed intentions. Liam Caravan, a silent and mysterious man, lifts his cup and drinks while Arhin, observant and cautious, studies him in the dim light. A tense silence lingered as a mysterious presence with unclear intent cracked their own finger, the sharp sound echoing through the room. A hand gripped a cup tightly on the worn wood as someone muttered that this was a place where death waited. An injured and weak young man coughed violently into a blood-stained cloth, the tense silence broken only by the rasp of his breath. Liam Caravan, injured but composed, dabbed blood from his lip with a cloth and steadied himself. A vulnerable young man with dark hair doubled over, coughing near a cabinet filled with bottles. Someone, unseen except for their boots, quietly judged the situation and decided it looked just right. A black screen signaled a pause in the story, promising that events would soon continue. Soft sunlight drifted through scattered clouds above the treetops, as the narrator reflected on everything that had changed since that day. A determined young man with dark hair climbs the steep hill, pressing onward as sunlight catches the lone tree waiting at the summit. Loose rocks tumbled down as a determined young man with dark hair gripped the cliff with only his left hand. Shadowy figures plunged through swirling debris, vanishing into the smoky darkness. Arhin, a determined young man with dark hair, points his dagger at the defeated swordsman while Liam Caravan watches silently from the background. A determined young man with dark hair sits cross-legged atop a sunlit rock, lost in quiet meditation beneath the wide blue sky. A wounded young man with dark hair strains helplessly against tight ropes, his strength fading until he can barely move. Liam Caravan lunges down from above, launching an intense attack toward Arhin. He struggles to rise from the cracked rocky ground, biting his lip in determination. His fingers dug into the cracked stone as he insisted to himself that he had pushed his body to the absolute edge. Sweat gathered on a pale hand as it pressed hard against the rough, broken wall. A burdened, regretful young man admitted he could only blame himself for failing to stop Liam after he became a monster. A silent night stretched across the bare branches as the narrator explained he'd spent the last month and now questioned forming a mana heart. Mist curling through a barren, midnight forest, the narrator spoke softly about surviving training that pushed him to the very edge. A reflective, regretful figure leaned against the tree and quietly admitted he simply hadn't been able to do it. Leaning against the tree, a wary young man exhaled in relief, then snapped to attention as something unseen caught his focus. He clenched his hand, tense with hesitation as the forest pressed in around him. A young man with dark hair flashed a confident grin, sweat beading at his brow as determination took hold. Light shimmered across the figure's neck and chest, signaling that something within them was beginning to transform. A glowing title emerged, swords crossed behind it, promising a legendary tale about to unfold. Steel clashed as a resilient swordsman blocked the energy-charged blow aimed at him by a determined, aggressive opponent. A chained ball hurtled through the shadowy hallway, its heavy links clattering as it swung past the dim chandelier overhead. A massive, circular object plunged from above, trailing streaks of light and scattering debris through the blue-tinged air. A young man with dark hair narrowed his eye, narrowly dodging as a fierce swordsman's blade sliced past in a blur. A gust of wind swept past, the air splitting with the sharp sound of a blade cutting swiftly through empty space. He gripped the glowing sword and unleashed a swift, powerful slash. Liam Caravan's intense gaze fixed ahead, every muscle taut with focus as the tension in the air grew sharper. Steel clashed in the dark corridor as a determined young man with dark hair met his opponent's blade head-on, senses sharper than ever. A young man with dark hair blocks a flurry of sword strikes from above, deflecting each blow with precise, focused movements. Then, a menacing swordsman swung his blade with furious strength, cutting through the darkness as the sound of steel filled the tense air. He punched forward with a chained fist, feeling every sense sharpen beyond belief. A spiked mace sliced through the air as a menacing adversary closed in, the swoosh echoing with danger. Liam Caravan swung his weapon in a fierce arc, unleashing a surge of force toward his unseen opponent. A determined young man lunged forward with his sword, clashing against a formidable adversary in the shadowed expanse of the grand hallway. A glowing sword streaked through the dark darkness as an aggressive and focused antagonist swung it in a swift, precise motion. The aggressive and focused swordsman's hand blurred as he unleashed a swift, powerful sword swing through the tense air. A menacing man with a whip slammed it into the stone floor, sending sparks bursting across the dimly lit hall. Arhin, a determined young man with sharp reflexes, twisted aside as the swordsman's blade sliced through empty air. A clenched fist drew back, and Arhin focused every fiber of his body on the coming strike. Liam gripped the sword tightly, his focus sharpening as determination set in. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, lunged forward and attacked the swordsman with a powerful swing of his blade. A young man with dark hair gripped heavy chains, feeling as if the world pressed in on him from every side. The aggressive, fast swordsman sliced through the air with a rapid, precise swing, the blade blurring as tension crackled in the space around him. He swung his chained weapon upward, forcing the swordsman to reach out defensively as the clash between them intensified. Arhin, agile and alert, darted to the side with his sword ready as the swordsman's strike missed by inches. Then the swordsman froze in shock, his wide blue eye reflecting the sharp glint of a blade inches from his face. The fierce, aggressive man swung his massive sword downward with brutal force, the heavy blade slicing through the darkness as tension thickened. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, surged forward with explosive speed, his sword flaring with energy as debris scattered in his wake. Momentum slammed to a halt as the young man with dark hair struck a suspended object with his chained weapon. Everything seemed frozen mid-motion. Arhin, defensive and alert, skidded across the ground with his sword raised as the swordsman advanced in pursuit. A blurred red glow streaked downward as Liam Caravan, a stern man with graying hair, stared upward in shock and dread. A sword tore straight through a figure as blood exploded outward. The aggressive swordsman didn't hesitate. A young man with dark hair steadied his breath, crimson droplets reflecting in his intense gaze as he focused on the battle ahead. Then, a young man with dark hair hurled glowing energy spheres from his hands, fierce determination blazing in his eyes. Steel flashed as the aggressive swordsman swung his blade in a swift, deadly arc. Steel plunged into Arhin's torso as blood burst from the wound, leaving the young man with dark hair frozen in shock. A hand gripped the sword tighter as someone reflected on how much they had changed since before. A pensive and intense figure clenched their jaw, thinking to themselves there could only be one true reason behind these events. A determined young man's face lingered in the shadows as he quietly admitted to himself how far he had managed to evolve. A faint blue energy shimmered before him as he quietly realized for the first time that he could sense mana. A confident man with dark hair breathed out slowly, the corners of his mouth curling into a faint, smug smile. A gleaming sword stood upright in the rocky ground, its blade catching the light while the world around it remained still and silent. Then dozens of battered swords jutted from the earth beneath a sky stripped bare by wind and shadow. Two swords stood buried deep in the rocky earth, their hilts jutting upward in a silent challenge. A meditative, focused man sits beneath a tree as an imposing, ghostly figure floats above him with arms crossed, flanked by two massive swords. A young man with dark hair gazed upward, quietly considering how much of his success came from the needle's strength. He stood in the fading light, quietly marveling at something that left him astonished. A mouth exhaled a glowing breath, the tense air broken by someone addressing their master in a low, respectful voice. Liam Caravan, an older man with a gray beard, silently wondered what he might achieve if he reached the next stage of his development. A confident man spoke down to Arhin, telling him he was still inexperienced, but that he would answer the question anyway. Liam Caravan, a serious and determined man, explained that everything would change after awakening the mana heart. Liam reflected that only by reaching deeper understanding could one truly grasp the extent of sword power as a novice. A shadowy figure asserted that reaching the same level would make them equals. A young man with a prominent scar stared ahead, declaring he had reached the same level as the owner of the needle. Glowing red energy flared as a threatening and powerful man warned that stepping any further would have consequences. A glowing portal burst open in the darkness as an unseen voice explained that passage through it would unlock the superhuman realm and new physical abilities. A lone armored swordsman stood wreathed in blue light, channeling energy from his mana heart as the air pulsed with power. A lone figure in armor stood on a radiant stage, sword in hand, as an unseen voice declared this was the realm of the Sword Walker. A close-up of a strategic and focused antagonist's face, he quietly considered what would come after the sword novice stage. Liam Caravan, a thoughtful man, calmly explained that seeing the true difference firsthand would quickly answer any lingering curiosity. Arhin, a respectful young man, responded with a quiet affirmation as Liam Caravan stood composed in the moonlit forest. Liam Caravan, analytical and probing, said he wanted to ask a follow-up and hinted he might be sensing something important. A dusky sky hung overhead as an ominous voice mentioned the trespasser. A brooding, solitary man sits by his fire, muttering that someone new has recently made this place their home. Fiery embers crackled and fell, painting the twilight sky with flickering orange sparks. A menacing figure with a sword strapped to his leg tightened the sheath, embers glowing around him as faint blue lines pulsed across the rocky ground. A young man with dark hair dropped to one knee, channeling crackling energy through his hands as the ground beneath him quivered. A mysterious figure stepped close to the flames, and someone wondered aloud if this was truly a sword walker. Liam Caravan looked down, his eyes shadowed by a quiet intensity. A glowing blue light twisted through the darkness as an unseen voice insisted this opponent stood far above the lesser foes they'd faced before. Liam Caravan agreed with a steady voice, his confidence clear as dusk settled around the leafless trees behind him. A young man with dark hair pressed his hand to the ground, steadying himself as he quietly admitted he expected to lose and needed to prepare. The determined man told Liam Caravan he never really had any other choice from the start. A silver-haired figure stood alone in the moonlit forest as an unseen voice questioned whether he could simply walk away from this doomed battle. Arhin, his eyes fierce in the moonlight, declared that refusing was never an option for him. A lifeless expanse stretched beneath fading light, and the narrator reflected on how many years had passed since this land had become so desolate. A gentle breeze stirred the night as the narrator stated this was the only place that truly mattered. He stood alone on the cliff, quietly saying he wanted a place to remember the days spent with everyone. Then Liam Caravan stood silently beneath the stars, pausing before the swordsman with only the quiet night between them. Arhin, a determined young man, squared off against Liam Caravan in the shadowed forest as tension crackled between them. Liam Caravan, solemn and advisory, told his child that strength would be needed for what lay ahead. The domineering man in dark clothing floated above, declaring to Liam Caravan that in the Iron Kingdom, only strength determined who held power. Liam Caravan, wise and authoritative, warned sternly that certain feelings might be natural, but they were a luxury that could not be afforded right now. A resolute young man with dark hair clenched his fist as an unseen voice urged him to hold on to his feelings and remember them. The unseen voice urged him to use his emotions as fuel, endure the coming hardships, and become stronger through every trial ahead. Clouds drifted across the glowing moon as a commanding voice urged him to grow stronger, so no one would ever look down on him again. Soft moonlight spilled over the silent mountains, bathing the world in a calm, silver glow. Rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the world into shifting shadows and blurred edges. Blue fire flickered in the darkness as someone suggested their master understood more than anyone else realized. Blue flames curled around a glowing sword as a menacing and powerful man raised it high, casting an ominous light into the darkness. The cloaked swordsman stood ready with his sword aimed at a smaller young man with dark hair, both locked in a tense forest standoff at sunset. A blond young man with a sword stepped into the fading light and commanded his unseen opponent not to even think about running. A hostile man lunged forward, thrusting his glowing sword toward Liam Caravan as he spat out a challenge. Shadows deepened across the forest floor as a low, eerie hum crackled through the trees. A man with determined eyes turned slightly, warning his unseen opponent not to turn his back. A mysterious figure, enigmatic and powerful, radiated a swirling blue aura from his waist as the atmosphere thickened with tension. Blue flames swirled around Liam Caravan's intense face as he drew on their power, his focus sharp beneath the shifting shadows. A determined and threatening man glared forward, warning that he would cut Arhin down in a flash. A chilling darkness settled as the narrator revealed they were suddenly confronted by a daunting trial. Thunder rolled above a restless sea, shadows twisting beneath the storm-heavy sky. Heavy rain hammered down as the narrator reflected that everything had changed since the stranger arrived in Caravan. Then brilliant streaks of light sliced through the storm clouds, scattering the darkness above. Still, each day the narrator found himself watching the man, making observation a quiet ritual beneath the endless rain. Rain drummed against the weathered rooftops as the village huddled in silence, hidden behind tangled branches beneath the brooding, gray sky. Rain continued to ripple across the empty ground as the narrator quietly mentioned, making several observations about the man. Rain fell steadily as someone quietly remarked that the village remained eerily lifeless despite so many houses standing empty. Liam Caravan, a reflective man with arms crossed, stood near the stone wall, quietly thinking that none of the items inside had ever been touched. Then Liam Caravan stood in the rain, silently acting as if the possessions nearby belonged to someone else and were not worth his concern. A young man with dark hair stepped forward through the rain, carrying only a battered sack and living with nothing but what he brought. A young man with dark hair sat alone on the cliffs, watching the vivid sunset as his thoughts drifted far beyond the waves. A cloaked figure knelt in the midnight forest, clutching his sword as he quietly considered whether to spend the entire night in prayer. The narrator's voice softened as a concluding thought settled quietly, marking the end of that chapter's reflection. A young man with dark hair peeks from behind a tree, whispering to himself that the figure ahead must be a knight. A calm and watchful antagonist lingered in the shadows, studying the weary young man kneeling with his staff under the trees. Liam Caravan, a wise and approving mentor, remarked that Arhin was strong enough to become a sword walker. Light pours through stained glass as an unseen voice reflects that someone obeys strict rules even when no one is there to watch. A faceless man with an air of authority sits tall on an ornate throne, noting that such disciplined people are rare outside the ranks of knights. A knight in full armor kneels beneath bluish light, silent and contemplative. Liam Caravan, a thoughtful man, remarked to an unseen listener that knights are usually guided by honor and justice, so their new neighbor might not be so bad. A reflective and observant figure leans quietly against a tree as someone nearby admits they believe these people truly uphold honor. Liam Caravan, wise and contemplative, added that calling these people just would give the wrong impression. Liam Caravan explained that people define honor in their own ways. The narration continued, explaining that what a knight considers good and honorable may be seen differently by others because a knight's honor is unique. A faceless figure sits tall on a glowing throne, declaring that everything is determined by the person who gives the order. A heavy foot, its owner still hidden, pressed down onto a mound of glittering gold coins, and the authority figure declared that loyalty belongs to one alone. A stern older man with a white beard leaned in, saying he would explain once more what it truly means to be a knight. A lone bird soared against a blood-red sky as the narrator called knights nothing more than butchers who hide behind the illusion of honor. A sword jutted from the ground beneath a blood-red sky as the narrator stated that knights are executioners shaped by inherited swordsmanship. A wounded man with dark hair reached out, his hand hovering over the sword as he reflected that armored foes are always exhausting to defeat. Liam Caravan, a cautious and advisory man, warns Arhin in a low voice not to be influenced by the weight of titles. A young man with dark hair stood in the forest, pondering Liam's advice to judge a man's character before drawing any conclusions. Liam Caravan, confident and imposing, tells Arhin that doubt lies at the heart of every lesson. A figure hidden behind a tree spoke quietly, saying that this particular quality was the listener's greatest strength. Liam Caravan, reflective and introspective, wondered aloud if doubt could truly be considered a valuable trait. Liam Caravan, a grave and contemplative figure, stood in the dim light holding an ornate sword, saying Arhin had always been skeptical since childhood. Liam Caravan, a curious and skeptical researcher, rested his head on a desk covered with books, recalling how Arhin still questioned his father's legendary tales. Liam Caravan, authoritative and cautionary, warned that Arhin might have let his new powers put him in even more danger. Liam Caravan, calm and analytical, watched his bloodied opponent kneel as he remarked that sharp observation had helped eliminate doubts and reveal the answer. A gloved hand gripped the sword handle, and the swordsman reflected that true doubt meant refusing to be swayed by appearances. Liam Caravan, a strategic and thoughtful man, considered combining every available method with reason as he stood focused amidst swirling energy. He revealed a quiet resolve, admitting deciding his only goal was to move closer to the truth. Turbulent water pressed in from all sides as an unseen voice declared that only those who question themselves can truly move forward. A young man with dark hair is trapped underwater, reaching desperately toward the shimmering surface above as bubbles slip through his fingers. Light filtered through the water as a quiet voice urged him never to let go of that unbreakable spirit. Liam, calm and instructive, told Arhan that the greatest gift he possessed in swordsmanship was something he should never forget. A young man with dark hair draws in a tense breath, his lips parting as he prepares to speak. A shadowed figure in the forest responded with obedience, promising to follow their master's command without question. Arhan, injured and unconscious, lies on the forest floor as a ghostly Liam caravan hovers above him in the darkness. A hand gripped the weapon's handle, tension building in the silent air. Clouds drifted past a full moon, casting silvery light over the restless night as a quiet voice recalled practicing a master's lesson. He explained that after watching the stranger carefully, he never let his guard down again. Soft clouds glowed in the evening sky as the unseen narrator decided Liam was safe and approached, suggesting he settle quietly in the village. A cautious young man with dark hair crept forward, saying he approached slowly but something stopped him. Blue fire erupted as a sword burst to life, flames crackling in the darkness. A confident man revealed the glowing, blue-flamed sword and stated he knew he had been watched for a long time. Arhan, a determined young man with dark hair, drew his sword and leveled its shining blade toward Liam Caravan in the fading sunlight. Liam Caravan, a nervous but determined man, gripped his sword and warned his unseen opponent not to try escaping. A tense young man with blonde hair faced the glowing sword as he hesitated, beginning to say he had something important to ask. A threatening antagonist stepped from the shadows and warned Arhan not to turn his back. Blue energy surged around Liam Caravan as he channeled his resolve, standing firm and ready for the challenge ahead. A young man with dark hair gazes ahead, his eye catching the eerie blue light as tension crackles in the air. The swordsman, a resolute and menacing antagonist, declared he would cut Arhan down in a flash. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, grimaced in worry and thought this encounter was nothing like what he had planned. Liam Caravan gripped his sword with white knuckles, determination flickering across his face as the tension in the room mounted. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, clenched his fists tightly as determination replaced the worry in his eyes. A stylized title page fills the screen, displaying the webtoon's name and credits in bold lettering. A serious young man with red hair stood against a shadowy backdrop as he quietly announced the title, The Needle Maiden. A steely and determined figure gripped a shining sword, quietly reflecting that their name had become more famous than they ever realized. Mercenary groups often tried to recruit the young man with dark hair, drawn by the reputation he had gained through his sword. Then two thugs cornered the young man with dark hair in a narrow alley, looking for trouble and preparing to pick a fight. People began to react differently once they heard about the young man with dark hair. Darkness rippled across the scene, and a quiet voice admitted that something about all this had made them pause and reflect. A blade pierced through Arhan's side as the aggressive swordsman struck, blood scattering in the violent clash. Kneeling on the stone pavement, a contemplative young man wished he could leave behind his reputation as a slender female mercenary with a needle-like sword. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, knelt beside Liam Caravan as Liam clutched his bleeding abdomen, pain etched across his face. An unseen voice spoke of someone striving to become a powerful swordswoman, determined to rise beyond her limits. A confident young man with a facial scar grinned as he raised a shining sword, determination flickering in his eyes. A hand tightened its grip around an object as the speaker acknowledged just how arrogant that thought had been. The sword's tip snapped off with a sharp crack, sending a small shard clattering onto the ground. Rain hammered down as a dark armored swordsman with glowing eyes stood motionless, his presence radiating menace. A dominant figure in armor leveled his shining sword at a kneeling young man with pink hair, declaring he knew the other was not human. A towering man in dark armor curled his lip, mocking the so-called Needle Maiden for daring to fight with such a feeble blade. The swordsman, a focused and intense figure in armor, glared with unwavering determination, his single visible eye locked on his unseen opponent. A cold and mocking antagonist leaned in close, telling his opponent he had only been fooling himself about his own skill. The arrogant and dismissive antagonist scoffed, telling the mercenary with a burned face that he was nothing more than an irrelevant hireling. A hand shot forward and the dominant antagonist grabbed the injured but defiant protagonist, jeering that he was just a helpless puppy failing his master. The menacing swordsman gripped Arhin's head and coldly said he would think less of him than a bug he could have crushed. The swordsman tightened his grip on Arhin and snarled that he would have shown no mercy if Arhin had not been a woman. The authoritative, red-haired armored figure turned away and declared that Arhin's life would be spared today only because of the order of the Red Hawk's rules. A heavy silence settled as an unseen voice reminded everyone that the Red Hawks never take the lives of women or children. The dominant, merciless swordsman delivered a final warning, telling his unseen opponent to remember this mercy for the rest of their life. A young man with dark hair sits alone in a sunlit room, quietly reflecting. A trembling hand gripped the sword's hilt, and the words "that day" echoed in the tense air. A blinding surge of power filled the space, and the narrator described how the difference in strength felt impossible to overcome. He stood solemnly beneath the bright sky, holding the shining sword near his chest as he considered what still separated him from the knight. He recalled hearing much later that the knight's exceptional swordsmanship actually had a formal name. Arhin, a determined young man, braced himself against the sunset and silently repeated the words "sword walker" in his mind. A menacing man grips his gleaming sword, his other hand raised in a careful gesture as dusk settles around him. A young man with dark hair gazed downward, reflecting that in the memories he absorbed from Mary, even she had been defeated by a walker. A menacing figure stood at sunset and raised a shining sword, tension tightening his throat as he swallowed and braced for what was coming. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, stood beside his father and quietly admitted this new power felt stronger than anything he'd known before. A deadly explosion erupted with a deafening blast, and someone felt the unmistakable presence of death closing in. A menacing man with a glowing red eye loomed behind a massive sword, his presence thickening the air with danger. Doubt crept in as the narrator quietly wondered if things might turn out differently than expected. A glowing blue heart pulsed in the swirling darkness, casting eerie light that seemed to breathe with slow, ominous energy. Suddenly, a swirling vortex deepened the darkness as someone questioned if this was truly the reason behind everything. A young man with dark hair felt his heartbeat grow stronger, wondering aloud if something inside him had changed. Then a heavy boot slammed down with a sharp thud, and a sudden flash tore through the shadows. A single, piercing blue eye glowed with sudden clarity as he declared he could finally see the truth. In the clearing, Liam Caravan approached Arhin and explained that only sword walkers and above could reach the superhuman realm. Streams of glowing blue mana erupted from Liam Caravan's body as Arhin, a young man with determined eyes, watched with anticipation. Blue energy surged beneath their feet as Arhin and Liam Caravan stood face to face, each channeling their will to merge attack and defense. A sudden splash echoed through the darkness, breaking the tense silence that hung between father and son. A blade pierced the young man with dark hair, and dark energy began to spread from the wound as shock overtook his face. A wounded but still gripping his weapon, the swordsman clenched the sword hilt as dark energy crackled around his bleeding hand. Liam held his sword high against the sunset, declaring with awe that this was the sword walker's path. A menacing figure gripped his sword and demanded to know why someone had been watching him. A young man with dark hair focused intently, his gaze sharp as he silently considered the rumors of people vanishing in these lands. A determined and confrontational figure's eye narrowed as they demanded a reason, warning they would treat the other as an enemy unless satisfied with the answer. The swordsman, wary and probing, said he needed to find out whether the unseen presence was an ally or an enemy. Then the young man with dark hair gripped his raised sword and demanded that someone explain what he couldn't understand. He explained that he had grown up in this place and suspected a dark mage unleashed evil beasts while he was gone last year. Still, Arhin recalled that after he returned, everyone was gone and the village had been destroyed. He remembered how barbarians and thieves started invading, telling himself that the village and his own life were no longer safe. A close-up of her resolute gaze fills the frame as the unknown speaker states they decided to eliminate those responsible. A cautious voice decided not to reveal every detail, while another admitted the person they met seemed far stronger than expected. Then, a cautious and formidable opponent pointed his sword at Liam Caravan and admitted he could die if he approached carelessly. A boot pressed firmly into the earth as the unseen speaker explained they had watched closely to decide if their visitor was a friend or foe. The resolute figure declared that, had there been hostility, another path would have been chosen for the sake of this land. A foot slid into the soft light, and the unseen speaker questioned if their opponent had truly been ready to fight despite knowing there was no chance. Liam, a reflective man with dark hair, spoke quietly about how his most cherished memories were created in this very place. Liam Caravan, his gaze unwavering, said this place held too much meaning for him to ever walk away. A young man with dark hair gazed ahead, his eye reflecting silent thoughts as he paused to consider everything that had brought him here. A close-up revealed a young man with dark hair lost in thought as someone remarked that he must have endured much, calling him young lord. Liam Caravan rested against his massive sword and nodded in calm agreement, eyes closed. A character with spiky blonde hair spoke thoughtfully, saying it was his turn to share since neighbors should know a bit about each other. A blonde-haired figure gripped his sword and demanded his opponent drop their weapons. Liam Caravan, calm and resolute, lowered his sword and told the imposing swordsman to do the same so he could share his story. Liam Caravan, confident and commanding, ordered his unseen target to approach without delay. A mysterious figure stood shrouded in darkness and declared there was only one path to reach the heart of steel. Liam Caravan's intense gaze sharpened as he warned the listener that only by facing constant danger could true strength be forged. Liam Caravan explained that the body must eventually require its own mana heart. A hidden presence challenged the child with a question, asking if this was enough to spark motivation. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, his mouth slightly open as shock flickered across his shadowed face. Someone, their voice steady but guarded, refused to hand over the sword and admitted they still didn't fully trust the other person. Liam Caravan, a determined and assertive man, looked upward and firmly declared that he chose himself. A menacing man gripped the sword's hilt tightly, his breath catching as he prepared to strike. A calm yet menacing young man stared forward, his voice low as he warned that the sword would be useless if he truly meant harm. Liam Caravan said it would betray his honor as a knight to be the first to lower his sword, while both weapons remained drawn. The resolute man's jaw tightened as he announced that protecting his honor was the only thing that mattered now. A solitary young man with blonde hair stood firm, declaring that he knew the risks but could not back down. A mysterious figure stood beneath the pink sky, explaining that there was a reason for everything about to unfold. A young man kneels trembling under the looming shadow of a swordsman, who stands menacingly with his blade raised and ready to strike. With his head bowed, Arhin declared he would never again kneel or show fear before his enemies. Liam Caravan, confident and intense, stared ahead as his eye glowed with newfound determination. He insisted he would not surrender without even raising his sword. The swordsman taunted Arhin, demanding proof of his strength, while Arhin declared with resolve that he would not lose. A gentle breeze swept through the dusk, making the dry grass rustle softly in the fading light. Liam Caravan, a purposeful and composed man, walked toward Arhin in the quiet clearing as the last light of sunset lingered. A close-up revealed a mysterious boy's intense gaze as an unseen observer silently marveled at how uncanny he seemed. A slender figure with dark hair gripped his sword, while an unseen voice remarked that he could easily be mistaken for a young girl. Scars and muscle mapped the arm of a young man with dark hair, while someone quietly noted the signs of relentless training etched onto him. His small frame looked unassuming, yet his balanced and solid build suggested hidden strength. Then, a young man with dark hair stood tense as the narrator noted he lacked proper fundamentals and relied on a single, reckless strike. A boot came down hard on the earth as someone remarked that, even rated generously, the boy was still just a beginner. A calm and poised opponent stood alone on barren ground, facing an unseen threat as the tip of another sword hovered dangerously close. One sword gleamed with harsh light as an unseen speaker confidently dismissed any danger from his opponent. A calm and observant antagonist stood at a distance, sword in hand, while a young man with dark hair watched him closely. A chilling presence lingered as the narrator wondered what kind of emotion burned so fiercely in that young man's eyes. Liam Caravan's eye flashed with blue light, surprise flickering across his face as he realized the power awakening within him. A hooded figure stood motionless, his face hidden by shadows as the air thickened with quiet tension. A young man with dark hair locked his gaze on the thin blue line reflected in his eye, focus sharpening to a razor's edge. Liam Liam exhaled, his breath glowing as it left his lips. A sword blade shimmered with a blue aura as a menacing adversary prepared for the battle ahead. Then, the determined young man gripped his sword tightly as he acknowledged that only a truly committed effort would be enough. A menacing swordsman stood firm, blue energy swirling around his feet as he readied himself for the confrontation. Both fighters lunged forward. Arhin, a determined young man, clashed blades with the hostile swordsman as blue light erupted between them. A narrow beam of light pierced the darkness, scattering glowing particles through the still, mysterious air. A glowing sword hovered midair, its blue wisps flickering while the threatening swordsman reached out with determined intent. The swordsman, an aggressive attacker, launched himself downward as Arhin braced to strike with his sword under the tense night sky. Arhin, a strategic and focused young man, braced himself and decided he would strike the swordsman's wrist to disarm him instantly. A determined hand shot forward, seizing the sword's hilt with a swift, decisive motion. Above the chaos, a light-haired figure quickly decided this was the safest way to avoid hurting the other person. In the shadows, a menacing and powerful antagonist revealed a single glowing white eye, radiating a silent, ominous threat. Glowing projectiles tore through the rain-dark sky as a menacing man with cold eyes unleashed his attack. Steel crashed against steel as a menacing man with cold eyes struck his blade against the determined young man defending fiercely. The confident and aggressive antagonist swung his weapon downward, sparks flying as his attack landed with precise, unyielding force. A young man with dark hair stared wide-eyed, shock flickering across his face. Arhin deflected the attack, his eyes wide with disbelief at what he had just managed to do. A sword blade quivered under the lights as the conflicted swordsman realized his opponent had somehow managed to defeat his strike. Then, the narrator revealed that the fighter was still only a novice, hinting there was much more to uncover. He stepped forward into the clearing, determination burning in his eyes as he swung his sword through the golden light of sunset. A single, heavy step landed on the cracked ground as a voice hinted that even a single breath could change everything. A young man with dark hair pants heavily, exhaustion etched across his face as each breath comes ragged and slow. A hand gripped a sword crackling with blue energy and sliced powerfully through the open air. Blue light blazed across Liam's determined face as he gathered his strength, eyes glowing with intensity, preparing to strike. Mana churned wildly around Arhin as someone exclaimed that he had made the very air move like crashing waves. Blue energy surged and someone said the power felt like a storm gathering. A heavy pounding echoed through the darkness, pulsing louder with each beat as loose strands of hair trembled at the edge of the frame. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, stared straight ahead as a glowing blue aura gathered around him. A bright blue orb pulsed at Arhin's chest and someone shouted that he had awakened his mana heart. A confident and aggressive man glared forward, insisting that parrying his attack should have been impossible. Liam Caravan, a bearded man with sweat glistening on his face, admitted with amazement that Arhin was the one responsible. A swirling blue energy surged between the clashing swords. Someone wondered aloud if a mana heart could really form in just that fleeting instant. A glowing mana heart pulsed in the darkness as the narrator explained that a regular one possesses soft, fluid properties. Then, someone marveled that this crystalline core was unexpectedly resilient as the star radiated beams of intense blue energy. A focused young man's eye glinted in the dark as he wondered aloud if this core felt almost as unyielding as steel. Still, the young man's intense blue eye gleamed with raw energy as he channeled power into the darkness. A cloaked figure stood in the fading light, and he quietly admitted there were still too many unknowns about this boy. A towering figure advanced across the wasteland, drawing closer to a young man with dark hair who stood his ground, both locked in silent tension. Then a distant rumble echoed as an unseen threat closed in, and someone thought their opponent was about to attack. Blue energy surged as the young man with dark hair swung his glowing sword, pouring all his determination into the strike. A hand gripped a small, glowing black object, and someone announced they were preparing to unleash the ultimate strike. A stark title filled the darkness, swords crossing behind it to signal the story's focus and the battles to come. White letters hovered in darkness, quietly crediting the creators as the story paused for a brief, silent introduction. An exhausted but determined young man struggles to catch his breath, each inhale sounding desperate in the tense silence. A trembling armored arm hung in the darkness, and the owner admitted to themselves that their skill with the sword had not been the deciding factor. An object trembled violently as it turned aside the knight's blade, the voice insisting this was no ordinary defense. A young man with dark hair stared sideways, sweat dripping down his tense face as a single word echoed in his mind: luck. Then, a menacing swordsman swung deliberately at the young man's wrist, holding back his strength and avoiding anything that could cause real harm. Electric blue swords collided with a sharp crack, filling the air with sparks as the clash sent a surge of tension through the arena. A dark figure raised a glowing blade overhead. He thought to himself that only this advantage let him predict where the sword would strike. Still, a young man with dark hair gripped his large blade tightly, bracing himself to thrust forward with unwavering determination. Then, someone unseen slipped a needle through the opening and ordered the swordsman to stop his attack. Arhin and Liam Caravan's swords collided at the summit, sparks flying as each pressed forward with unwavering force. A heavy silence lingered as an unseen voice admitted the miracle had come at a steep personal cost. A powerful and aggressive man slams his foot down, sending cracks through the ground from the sheer force of the clash. Still reeling, the injured young man clenched his fist and muttered that it felt like every bone in his body had been crushed. Bright bursts of light flared as the injured young man with dark hair gasped that the pain shooting through him was almost unbearable. A wave of dread swept over him as he realized the strength gap was impossibly vast. A calm, composed man stands beneath swirling mist, facing a massive black wolf with glowing eyes as tension crackles in the air. Then, a mysterious figure's footsteps echoed as they disappeared into the darkness, leaving only a faint spotlight behind. A nervous smirk flickered across the lower face of an unknown figure, a bead of sweat betraying tension that lingered in the heavy silence. A close-up reveals a white-haired figure, his voice steady as he declares he has finally unlocked a hidden power. A young man with focused eyes gathered blue energy in his palm, the glow pulsing brighter with each heartbeat. Then, the determined young man lifted his hand and revealed a glowing blue heart, declaring with conviction that it was the mana heart of steel. Still, the young man considered aloud that he remained at a novice level despite the surge of intense red energy behind him. Two figures faced off on a barren hill beneath a red sky, and the swordsman readied his blade, admitting his thrusts would not reach Arhin. A single line of glowing text pierced the darkness as the narrator stated there was only one possible path forward. A determined young man with dark hair weighed his options, telling himself that he needed to carve out his own path. Blue energy coiled tightly around the young man with dark hair as he focused, steeling himself for what was about to come. Blue smoke drifted across a glowing screen while an unknown figure began to tap into Mary's memories. The sky stretched endlessly above while the narrator spoke of building everything on a heart as strong as steel. A young man with dark hair knelt in the sand, staring intently at the object in his hand as defeat settled over him. A hand closed tightly around a sword's hilt as someone spoke about the path of a sword walker. His jaw clenched, the young man with dark hair thought about hitting a wall he could not overcome and how pain filled his body. Light flooded the sky as birds scattered, and someone recalled that a single thought pushed itself to the forefront in that instant. He watched the bird soar across the bright sky, a small sharp object resting in his hand. A kneeling figure froze as the voice was revealed to be Hedgel's. Arhin and Liam, both tense, searched the dim corridor as Liam said they lost him, and Arhin warned this wouldn't be their last encounter. Liam Caravan lay on the ground, his breaths coming in ragged gasps as exhaustion overtook him. Mary, a supportive and serious advisor, told Liam Caravan that swordsmen see an unbeatable adversary as a wall they cannot overcome. A determined and confrontational figure stepped down hard, insisting only those without courage make excuses instead of meeting a challenge head-on. Liam Caravan, a reflective and determined man, declared that every wall exists to be climbed and overcome. A scarred and contemplative swordsman spoke quietly about the heavy burden of fear every swordsman must carry. The narrator urged that every obstacle is simply a step towards something greater, telling them not to look away from the path ahead. A young man with dark hair stands tall, radiant energy swirling around him as the clouds churn overhead. A flickering red flame glows on the ground as a commanding voice urges someone to stand tall. Cracks split the ground as red and purple energy coils through the air, pulsing with ominous intensity. A glowing armored swordsman stands ready amid swirling flames, declaring that it is time to face the challenge. The armored swordsman, a menacing figure, slowly reveals his shining blade in the dim light, ready for the next move. A young man with dark hair clenched his fist and stepped forward, moving straight toward the imposing armored swordsman who stood ready with his blade. A foot swung down sharply, the tension in the air crackling as the next move unfolded. A young man with dark hair twists aside just in time as the armored swordsman's blade slices through empty air. The swordsman pressed his attack, warning that Arhin would be cut down when the moment arrived. Steel sliced the air in a blur as a weapon swung with blinding speed. Blood splattered as the aggressive swordsman's blade slashed across Arhin's eye, the pain hitting him sharp and sudden. The aggressive swordsman slashed forward, declaring that his enemy would soon collapse, bloodied and powerless before overwhelming strength. A solitary glowing bubble hovered in the darkness as the narrator warned that refusing to quit and challenging the enemy would have consequences. Then the aggressive swordsman stabbed forward with furious force, his silhouette slicing through the air in a violent burst of motion. Black liquid exploded across the bright emptiness, spreading like a warning from some unseen force. Smoke curled around the mysterious armored figure as he slowly raised his helmet, his silent focus drawn to the blade before him. A smoky shadow slipped through the crack as an unknown hand pushed the door open, and someone insisted that this path would take them beyond the wall. A young man with dark hair, bruised and sweating, steadied himself through the swirling smoke, recovering his breath with a confident smirk. A shadowy figure slammed onto the ground, the impact echoing through the darkness. Then, a young man with dark hair clutched his chest as his heart pounded hard against his ribs. Still, he gathered his resolve, repeating the words to trust himself as strength welled up inside his chest. Blue energy surged from his chest as the young man with dark hair focused it through his thin sword. Blue light blazed along the blade as the resolute young man gripped his sword, convinced that this was everything he needed. A hush settled over the fading light as the narrator quietly declared the story would continue another day. Glowing sword symbols shimmer behind the bold title, a promise that the legend of the sword-eating swordmaster is only beginning. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, his eyes set with unwavering resolve as the dusky sky deepened behind him. A reflective man with serious eyes gazed forward, voicing his thoughts about everyone who has ever carried a sword. A scarred, battle-hardened man gripped his sword hilt tightly, thinking only those who have endured fierce struggle can know true resolve. A heavy silence filled the darkness as the narrator warned that someday, two fates would collide with an unbreakable barrier between them. Liam Caravan, a determined and resolute man, walked steadily toward the massive wall blocking his path. A young man with dark hair grimaced, sweat trickling down his face as he strained against an invisible, crushing force. Then, a determined and cautious young man dropped to one knee, sword ready, bracing himself for the immense challenge ahead. A boot pressed down hard against the earth, the force made it almost impossible to move forward. A massive blade swept into view, and their instincts urged them to turn away and run. Still, an unseen voice quietly wondered about the mysterious boy's resilience as a booted foot descended with purpose. A single determined eye glared above shattered earth as the ground split with a sharp, echoing crack. Then a jagged crack tore through the ground, splitting the earth apart with a sudden, thunderous force. Debris tumbled from the fractured stone as the crack deepened, echoing through the silent air. Chunks of rock broke loose and crashed down as the darkness above continued to crumble. A violent crash exploded through the air, shaking the ground as shattered debris scattered in every direction. Someone chose to confront the danger directly as massive rocks thundered down from above. A young man with dark hair steadied his sword in front of him as debris floated all around, determination set in the shadows of his face. Still, the young man with dark hair admitted to himself that his challenge against this intimidating figure was nothing but bravado. Then the young man with dark hair insisted he had to face this trial, his voice steady with resolve. A barren stretch of earth lay beneath a cloudless sky, and someone declared that the path ahead did not need to be flawless. A sleeve brushed against the fading sky as someone quietly resolved that, no matter the obstacles, any chance to reach him was worth taking. Water splashed as a single shoe struck the ground, and someone stated firmly that this was enough. He focused with fierce determination, saying he needed to watch every detail closely. He told himself to analyze each muscle in motion and pay close attention to how the technique shifted. A silhouetted swordsman with a sword stood menacingly in the fog as someone caught their breath, remembering how Ira's life had ended. A young man with dark hair narrowed his eyes, telling himself to gather every scrap of information and discard anything that wouldn't help him win. He focused with unwavering intensity, ready to transform his resolve into something new. A glowing blue orb pulsed above the sword, sending swirling light across the blade in a sudden burst of energy. The determined antagonist pointed his glowing sword downward, thinking to himself that there was only one path before him now. A young man with dark hair stands gripping his sword as glowing blue energy begins to swirl around him in the darkness. Then blue energy bands snapped tight around him, locking the young man with dark hair in place. Blue energy spirals outward, forming a brilliant path through the darkness as someone silently resolves to reach the distant shining star ahead. Calm blue lines drift across the dark, slowly giving way to a peaceful night sky filled with distant stars. A bearded older man lifts his gaze and, with a proud smile, gently assures his child that they have done exactly what was needed. A gentle voice urged perseverance against hardship, its words echoing across the peaceful sky as the top of a silent figure's head caught the morning light. Suddenly, blue energy swirls skyward as an unseen figure declares that this is what it truly means to be a caravan. Blue light floods the darkness as a glowing sword pulses with energy, its presence shifting the air with a surge of silent anticipation. Liam Caravan, contemplative and determined, stood before the dark wall as swirling blue energy gathered at his back. A young man with dark hair stands above glowing blue ribbons, channeling energy as he repeats the command to cast his whole body forward. A surge of mystical energy radiates from the glowing blue sword as a resolute voice urges someone to forge themselves within the trial. A brilliant blue beam cut through the clouds, and an unseen presence declared that the world would soon be revealed. A blinding blue energy beam crashes down from above, its force splitting the air with a deafening shatter. A column of crackling blue and white energy erupts skyward, shards spinning as a solemn voice calls this moment the will of Caravan. A blinding, radiant beam descends from the sky, its energy crackling as the world seems to hold its breath. Then a massive explosion tears through the ground, sending debris and dust flying in all directions. Still, Arhan glares ahead with clenched teeth, fury building as he braces himself to launch his attack. The determined and aggressive swordsman charges forward, fist clenched and weapon raised, scattering debris as he explodes into motion. A shockwave rips across the barren ground as someone admits in their thoughts that fear gripped them. Arhan, an injured but determined fighter, lunges forward with his fist clenched, driving himself straight into the fray. A fist tightens by someone's side as they quietly admit fearing how they managed to survive alone in the fire. Then a young man with dark hair steps forward, his resolve clear as he faces the swordsman standing ready, haunted by memories of loss. Head bowed, a young man with dark hair reflects that he once couldn't even face himself, and that was only the beginning. His face tense and partially hidden, the young man with dark hair struggled to breathe, feeling every breath catch in his chest. A boot slammed down, scattering rocks as the unrevealed figure thought back to the moment everything started to make sense. Arhan admitted to himself that it wasn't fire he feared, it was his own weakness that kept him running. Then the determined young man with a scar glared forward, fury burning in his eyes. A determined and resolute young man's voice cut through the darkness as he declared his intent to drive his blade forward. He clenched the sword hilt, embers swirling around his hand as tension crackled in the air. Flames devoured the house, casting a fierce glow across the world as a voice spoke of everything being consumed by fire. Fire swallowed the bodies of a grieving young man's family, and a voice broke through, blaming the flames that had taken everything from him. A serious young woman with reddish hair and a burn mark stared ahead, quietly thinking about what her happiness truly meant. A fiery backdrop pulsed as an unseen voice claimed that even the future now belonged to them. A determined young man with dark hair sprinted straight at the blazing wall, sword raised high, refusing to hesitate. A young man with orange hair closed his eyes, quietly wondering if anyone would say he had truly broken through. A determined young man with dark hair bared his teeth and shouted, his face bruised and contorted with furious intensity. A thin vertical glow flickered in the darkness, while a distant voice wondered aloud what they might say if given the chance. A single golden line split the shadows, embers floating in silence on either side. Arhan gripped his glowing sword, surrounded by swirling blue energy, and declared he no longer feared fire or the world itself. Arhan, a determined young man, braced himself against the oncoming energy and vowed aloud to keep fighting, even if he fell. Then, a determined young man with dark hair clashed his icy blade against the swordsman's fiery sword, defiance burning in every movement. A violent torrent of fire burst across the battlefield, swallowing everything in its path. Arhan clenched his fist in the heart of the flames, declaring that he was ready to face whatever power threatened him. Arhan hurled himself downward through the blaze, his sword aimed straight at his target as fire roared around him. The injured, off-balance swordsman fell backward, gripping his sword, shock flashing across his face as the blow sent him reeling. He surged forward at incredible speed, blade flashing as he struck with unwavering precision. A skilled, intense fighter narrowed his eyes and swung his sword in a single, blindingly swift arc. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, clenched his teeth as Liam Caravan's intense gaze met his. A determined and aggressive antagonist bared a fierce grin, charging forward with unrestrained intent. Blue energy exploded across the battlefield as the aggressive swordsman unleashed a devastating slash, raw power crackling through the air. A sudden blur slashed downward, the force behind it splitting the air with terrifying speed. A brutal impact echoed as the formidable antagonist's blade met that of a determined young man with dark hair, sending debris flying through the air. Arhan, a determined young man with dark hair, clashed swords with the formidable antagonist on the steep slope as energy erupted between them. Then a figure plummeted rapidly through clouds of debris, swallowed by the blur of motion. A spear spun in the air, slicing through the swirling debris as the aggressive fighter prepared his next move. A sword tore across the sky as the aggressive swordsman swung with fierce intent. Embers and shards floated down through the darkness, scattering faint light in the empty void. Then a sleek sword called Hedgel hovered in the darkness, its glow standing out against the void. Still, a quiet voice wondered if peace could be found beyond this life and admitted to leaving the orphanage, just as they had been advised. A shimmering sky stretched overhead as the narrator explained that someone left the orphanage behind and stepped out into the unknown. A young man with dark hair stands alone in a silent forest, gazing thoughtfully at the full moon above. A resolute figure gripped the sword handle, remembering the teachings that carried him to this moment. Light glinted off the needle's tip as the narrator recalled being given it and described running forward, driven by longing for freedom. A calm, purple-haired figure with eyes closed stands motionless in the icy gloom as a distant voice murmurs about the drifting nature of life. A hand gripped a dagger in the shadows, while an unseen voice reminded someone about the group they once commanded. An extreme close-up catches a reflective and intense eye, as the unknown character wonders aloud if they could claim to have truly lived that life. A burning village crackled in the night as a voice quietly admitted there were always people in the world much stronger than them. Flames roared through the chaos as a determined man lifted an injured figure, recalling how some barriers could never be broken by willpower alone. Flames devour a mysterious object on the ground as a voice challenges Hedgel with a pointed question. Flames flicker in the darkness as the narrator claims with certainty that their resolve will hold until the very end. A large swordsman with glowing eyes stands menacingly before a smaller figure, weapon raised over his shoulder, threatening him against the backdrop of fire. A young man with dark hair stands firm amid embers, insisting he never once ran from the obstacles before him. He grips the shining sword, declaring that anyone who steps in his path must stand still. A shadowed figure stands against swirling flames as an unseen voice promises they will cross paths again, according to Thurjan's doctrine. A calm night sky glimmers above a lone tree, while the narrator warns that everything will be consumed in flames when the fated day arrives. A lone young man with dark hair stands beneath the moonlight, then he says he will share his story as requested. Tears glimmer in a single eye as the reflective narrator quietly agrees to begin sharing their own story, just as they were asked. Two faces fill the frame, a determined young man and a sinister figure meet each other's gaze in tense silence. He charges ahead with a clenched fist, determined to make his point clear by telling his story through action. A blurred figure sprints through the forest as an alert, armored opponent braces for the incoming attack. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, hurtles through the air to confront his foe as the swordsman calmly declares he no longer fears fire. Liam Caravan stared wide-eyed, trying to process what had just happened. A single tear slid down Arhan's cheek as he faced the weight of his emotions. A shadowy figure, ominous and menacing, emerges from the darkness, half lit by a faint red glow. Then, a flaming sword plunged downward, scattering embers as the aggressive figure drove it into the darkness. Text glows ominously as the unseen force fully absorbs the needle, signaling a silent but unsettling transformation in the darkness. Silence falls as the words "to be continued" hover in the darkness, promising that the story's tension remains unresolved for now. Embers drift and flicker in the smoky darkness, hinting at a presence hidden within the swirling shadows. Sparks drift quietly through the twilight forest, tension thickening as each ember floats in the still, expectant air. Liam lay on the cold ground, staring upward with weary eyes as darkness pressed in around him. An injured young man with dark hair lies on the ground, wincing in pain beside a shining sword as he lets out a strained groan. A confused and disoriented young man with dark hair stands near a crackling campfire, quietly wondering if he had just been unconscious. A character with short blonde hair stands up as dusk settles, realizing aloud that the robe he wears once belonged to a knight. A determined young man with dark hair presses his hand to the ground, his thoughts racing as he realizes something important. A chipped blade rests in the dirt, and someone quietly admits they couldn't break through. A young man with dark hair sits cross-legged at dusk, his focus locked on the crackling sword flickering in his hand. A calm, confident man's gaze sharpens as he tells the child not to be disappointed. Liam Caravan, thoughtful and nostalgic, quietly reflects that the duel truly honored the Caravan name. A mysterious man floats above the shadowed forest floor, embers swirling in the darkness around him. Liam Caravan, a confident mentor, reminds Arhan that even in the face of heartbreaking defeat there is something valuable to be gained. A young man with dark hair speaks with intensity, telling Arhan he can sense that the needle has been fully absorbed. Fire blazes all around as a young man with dark hair narrows his eyes, his determination burning hotter than the flames. He gripped the sword tightly and remarked that his muscles felt far more flexible than he ever thought possible. A mouse looked around warily as a mysterious figure floated in the dusk, thinking that its senses had become as sharp as a wild animal's. A solitary fire crackled beside a young man with dark hair as he wondered if he had become a true veteran mercenary. A glowing, powerful image of a young man with dark hair loomed behind a small silhouetted figure, casting an ominous presence over the scene. A silhouetted figure stood alone with a sword, his entire life shaped by the unforgiving wilds. Arhan swung his blade with absolute focus, declaring aloud that he finally understood why his master had chosen this sword for him. He moved with explosive force, the blade cutting through the air as he insisted it was never just about the previous owner's skill. A close-up revealed a young man with dark hair, his eye wide as shock hit. He realized someone wanted him to witness her life. Then, a menacing figure unleashed a wave of shadowy power that tore violently across the ground. Still, the narrator urged him to recognize the unyielding will of a woman who never faltered, no matter how overwhelming the adversity. Liam Caravan stood quietly beneath the glowing embers and full moon, calm and watchful as the night pressed in around him. Liam Caravan, reflective and curious, sat by the campfire and wondered aloud if Arhan could just tell him things directly. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, managed a small, nervous smile as tension flickered across his face. Then, an imposing swordsman stepped forward as Liam Caravan hovered near the campfire and Arhan sat watchful on the ground. Liam Caravan, focused and alert, held his blade close and told the young master he had returned with something to drink. A mysterious figure began to summon water, their hand and cloak shifting near the fire as tension thickened across the campsite. Suddenly, a young man with dark hair plunged headfirst through the air, momentum carrying him downward in a blur of motion. Liam Caravan scratched the back of his neck and admitted with a nervous smile that the point just made was fair. Liam Caravan raised his sword and said they needed to clear up some misunderstandings. Still, the young man crouched low and pushed himself forward, every movement brimming with determination. A calm and confident man spoke, telling the child there was no need to be so guarded. Liam Caravan reassured the unseen character that no harm would come from the man they feared. Liam Caravan, now tense, admitted he understood why doubts would linger. The empathetic speaker assured the listener they understood how overwhelming recent events must have been. Liam Caravan nodded thoughtfully, reminding the listener that it was only natural to stay guarded at all times. A gloved hand set a pouch down on the glowing embers, and the cautious stranger offered to share their story first if it would help. A mysterious and cautious figure gripped the other's clothing, saying they would reveal their reason for coming if the listener agreed. Arhin, determined but strained, explained that there was a reason he could not harm his opponent. Liam Caravan, a stern older man, gasped in shock as someone announced they would introduce themselves. A serious man with tired eyes looked up and quietly said his name was Vettel. Vettel, a serious man with long hair and a beard, quietly described himself as a retired knight and a vagrant without a home. Then Vettel said he was a terminally ill man standing at the edge of death. A muscular man with glowing purple veins across his torso stood in an ominous light, his transformation radiating menace. A swirling purple light filled the dark as an unseen voice revealed that even the high clerics believed he had only a month left to live. Still, Liam Caravan, resigned and somber, reflected aloud that he was simply a sick man waiting for death. A nervous young man with dark hair reached out, asking if Liam Caravan would hear him out just for a moment. A young man with dark hair stands on one side of the campfire, facing his calm, watchful father across the flickering light in the tense forest silence. A gentle wind swept over the empty landscape, carrying glowing embers beneath a calm sky. Crossed swords gleam against a dark backdrop as the title emerges, setting the stage for the legend about to unfold. Glowing embers drift silently through the empty forest clearing, where the echoes of recent voices hang in the calm night air. The sky deepens as embers float by, while the narrator reflects that Sir Vettel's storytelling never matched his renowned swordsmanship. Two cloaked figures sit in silence by the campfire, while the narrator recalls how Sir Vettel's stories and emotions would spill out unpredictably. Liam Caravan, a reflective man with a gentle smile, thought the conversation hadn't gone as smoothly as he hoped. Liam, a thoughtful and observant man, watched Arhin and quietly acknowledged that he felt a deep sincerity beneath the awkward way the story was told. A reflective and contemplative figure sits near the fire, quietly explaining that after being diagnosed with an incurable illness, Sir Vettel left the knightly order. A somber man with long hair and a beard gazed into the fading light, wondering if he should search for a place to die. A young man with dark hair sits by the flickering campfire, gently placing another log onto the flames. A close-up of a reflective and candid man's intense red eye catches the firelight as he admits there was no grand reason for leaving his order. He quietly admitted he chose solitude, not wanting his death to trouble others, and confessed he needed time alone. Still, the pensive man considered what it meant to face the end alone, murmuring that these were his final moments. Liam Caravan, silent and intense, fixes his gaze forward without a word. Liam Caravan, wise and truthful, asserted that no falsehoods tainted the man's words. A calm man with dark hair stands silent, as the narrator quietly reflects on the persistent strength of the knight's mana heart. Purple energy surged as Liam Caravan let it consume his chest, and with a smug tone, he claimed something powerful was being devoured. A surge of purple and blue energy erupts, while an ominous voice warns that disaster follows once the mana heart is fully consumed. The narration grows darker, warning that if the force pierces the true heart, the person's life will end instantly. Shards of broken glass drift through darkness, catching the faint light as silence settles over the scene. A sword shatters into countless fragments, scattering through the darkness in a moment of tense, irreversible destruction. A low voice drifted through the mist, addressing the young master from somewhere unseen. A man with long brown hair and a beard leans forward, smirking as he asks if that was enough to become Arhin's friendly neighbor. Two hands hovered close together in the ember-lit dusk, one figure lingering tensely as if about to make a decision. Liam Caravan, a sincere and compassionate man, reached out his hand to Arhin, acknowledging quietly that speaking up must have been difficult. A young man with dark hair gripped his knee, quietly thanking the other for sharing the truth as he began to rise. The young man with dark hair looked down with a faint smile, then introduced himself as Arhin. Arhin clasped Liam Caravan's hand, declaring in a steady voice that he was the last living resident of this forgotten land. Liam Caravan shook Arhin's hand and welcomed him warmly as a new neighbor. Liam Caravan thanked Arhin for his hospitality, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect across the quiet room. Liam Caravan, a confident older man with a beard, stood with arms crossed, watching the young man before him in silence. The older man with white hair gazed forward, his eyes steady and full of thought. A young man with dark hair stands alone, gazing at embers drifting through a darkening sky. A young man with dark hair smiles faintly as a vivid blue orb ignites on his chest. A hand glows with pulsing energy as an unseen figure declares it's finally time to move forward. Liam Caravan, pensive and calculating, marketing, murmured that he was ready to act. A fierce, blood-splattered wolf with glowing eyes snarls as the relentless swordsman attacks with a furious, lethal strike. Blood splatters across the intense eye of a fierce white creature as the injured swordsman is struck by a violent blow. A crimson haze lingers in the silence, particles drifting upward as the sense of danger hangs heavy in the air. Then, days later, sunlight spills across a quiet path winding through green fields toward distant mountains, and everything feels still. A bright sun hangs overhead as someone wonders aloud why nothing makes sense anymore. A wooden cart rumbles along the dirt road as a calm young man with dark hair sits beside a focused, older companion. A horse's hoof thuds softly against the earth, and Liam Caravan says he assumed Arhan would begin teaching him personally. A figure sits quietly in the dim light, wondering why they must suddenly travel after finally reaching the rank of novice. Liam Caravan, a confident mentor, floats cross-legged in the air and tells Arhan he is struggling because he hasn't mastered the basics. A cloaked young man with dark hair considers the manor ahead, thinking Sir Vettel's help should keep it safe for now, but doubts linger. A mysterious and commanding presence stands firm in the mist, quietly wondering if the long journey ahead is truly necessary. Liam Caravan, an experienced mentor, tells the contemplative blonde young man that he still thinks like an ordinary lad. Liam Caravan's stern gaze sharpens as he demands to know how many times he must repeat himself to the foolish child. With pride and defiance, an unseen voice insists the Caravans are set apart, claiming their blood makes ordinary swordsmanship worthless. Liam Caravan, a mentor figure offering guidance, tells the young man that enduring harsh challenges is essential for real growth. A wise and contemplative older man told Liam Caravan that it was time to absorb a new sword. A confident and purposeful figure stepped forward beneath the wide blue sky, explaining that their destination was ideal for what they needed. Liam Caravan grinned, his tone promising that somewhere out there was a place filled with new chances. A young man with dark hair stared into the sky, weighing the deadly seriousness of battles where victory demands risking everything. A shattered moon hung in a dark sky as the narrator described a place where lineage and status meant nothing, drawing all manner of warriors and outcasts together. Sunlight washed over the Grand Colosseum as the narrator reflected, saying that in their era, this place was known by another name. A single foot stepped forward in the courtyard, echoing with purpose beneath the towering arches. A young man with dark hair blocked the fierce attack as two swords collided, sparks scattering through the tense air. Flashes erupted as the aggressive swordsman unleashed a devastating attack, the force blurring the world in a rush of steel and light. Steel crashed in a blinding flash as the swordsman's blade met Arhan's strike, each refusing to yield an inch. The swordsman hammered his blade downward with unstoppable force, driving Arhan back in a storm of light and impact. Light and shadow streaked across the frame as the impact blurred everything into a chaotic rush. Then, a young man with dark hair staggered as two men in the background shouted at him, their voices rising in raw, aggressive triumph. A mouth opened wide in a desperate shout as the world blurred by, chaos boiling around the massive building in the background. A clenched fist hovered in the foreground while two figures clashed with swirling energy at the center of the circular arena. Still, the tense crowd clustered together in the rain, each person raising a fist high with unwavering determination. A thunderous roar erupted from somewhere unseen, shaking the wooden floor and sending a wave of tension through the arena. Then, a towering Colosseum loomed above, its ancient walls casting dramatic shadows across the sky. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, stood silent as Liam Caravan's ghostly figure appeared before him in the grand hall. Arhan braced himself to face the menacing swordsman as Liam told him they were counting on him and reminded him he wasn't alone. The words to be continued appeared, leaving the outcome uncertain. Sunlight poured over the city as distant bells echoed. This was Firma, the city of steel. Shops clustered along winding streets as the morning sun bathed the medieval town, peaceful and still beneath the watchful mountains. Inside a shadowy wooden room, a bearded man with gentle eyes bowed his head in silence. A skilled metallurgist hammered a glowing blade near the forge, his focus unbroken as another figure worked quietly in the background. A wooden sign marked with a hammer and shield swung above the grand building, and someone explained that all the Iron Kingdom's weapons and armor were made here. Outside, townspeople moved through the bustling marketplace, carts creaked by and workers tended tended to weapon racks beneath the midday sun. Now, armored figures gathered on the stone pavement as someone explained this place was sometimes called the Land of Swords. Now, the narration revealed that what truly transformed Firma into a thriving metropolis was something far beyond its marketplace or forges. A scream echoed through the arches of a looming building as someone remembered this place from a distant, haunting memory. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, and his father stood at the base of the massive stone arches, gazing upward in tense silence. Then he stepped forward into the vast arena, his eyes fixed on the towering stands above. Still, Liam Caravan glanced upward and remarked that the arena's name had changed over the years. Then, a reflective figure walked onward, recalling how the roaring crowd stirred up a wave of nostalgia. Liam Caravan, a wise man with gray hair, quietly noted how the passion inside the stadium seemed to fill the air. A young man with dark hair paused, recalling that he remembered this place for the many duels that once took place here. Now, the narration explained that ferocious beasts clashed in the arena's beast duels to prove which of them held the greatest strength. Now, emblematic figures showed a swordsman squaring off against a beast, as the narration declared that humans were once matched against monsters in primal duels. Then, the narration stated that different races and clans battled fiercely for dominance in the interkind duels, each seeking supremacy through bloody conflict. Then, the narrator declared that nothing compared to the savagery of the gladiator duels, as a single drop of blood splattered in darkness. A bloodied fist clenched tight in the darkness, drops falling as the air thickened with the promise of violence. Still, the narration described warriors showing off countless unique powers and fighting styles. Two muscular men crashed together in brutal close combat, fighting with raw instinct and fury. Then, the narration revealed that the victor would take both the life and possessions of the one who fell. A red object shattered violently, fragments scattering under the force of a sudden, unseen blow. A dark, ominous figure cloaked in shadow stood beneath a blood-red sky, jagged energy crackling around him as tension filled the air. The wild crowd, faces twisted in frenzy, roared for even more violence as the bloodshed only fueled their hunger. Two men with wild eyes laughed maniacally, declaring they had gambled away their gold and found satisfaction in the chaos surrounding them. The narrator described a city steeped in madness, built on the blood of countless gladiators. Then the city of Firma stretched before them, its stone arches and gleaming rooftops bathed in bright daylight. Shadows swept across rooftops as the town below held its breath, waiting for something unseen to break the uneasy silence. An older man with a beard chuckled gently, while a younger blonde man glanced at him nervously beneath a wide, cloudless sky. A young man with dark hair rested his hand on the hilt of his sheathed sword, thinking this truly was the place to grow stronger. A menacing man gripped his sword tightly, wondering aloud what power he might gain if he consumed the weapons of fallen gladiators. Liam Caravan, a confident older man with gray hair, mocked the unseen listener and told them their thinking was far too simple. The sky faded into deep gold over the distant forest as the unseen speaker mused about forcing someone to consume every weapon in the pile. A shining sword stood alone in the rubble, as the unseen speaker declared that even the weapons of the unworthy would be left behind. A single, focused eye narrowed as Liam Caravan delivered a warning. He told Arhan that consuming every weapon wouldn't lead him forward. Shattered glowing sword fragments drifted through the darkness, as the unseen speaker warned that the memories within the swords could ultimately overwhelm the user. Shards of glass tumbled past a focused young man with glowing patterns on his face, each fragment capturing figures trapped within. Shocked, a young man with dark hair stared as shards of glass floated around him, each one reflecting a violent struggle frozen in time. A faint silhouette clutching a sword hovered in the broken reflections, as an unknown voice warned that losing control to the blade would mean losing oneself. Liam Caravan, an experienced mentor, reminded the nervous blonde Arhan that he must be the one to control the sword. Liam Caravan spoke firmly, telling Arhan he should only consume the swords Liam selects until he learns this insight for himself. Bright sunlight streamed through scattered clouds, as an unseen narrator urged everyone to head for the grand arena where gladiators would soon clash. A quiet blue sky stretched overhead, the world pausing in stillness before anything begins. Clouds drifted across the sky as the towering Colosseum waited in silence, its arches promising battles yet to come. Several armored figures and a horned warrior marched together through the vast hall, each step echoing with determination and tension. 3 hours later, the speaker acknowledged that the young man with dark hair was named Arhan. The swordsman, a skilled and physically strong fighter, blocked a punch from Liam Caravan, who sounded shocked that this was his first time participating. A woman with green braided hair smiled warmly and directed someone to head over to the registration desk. The woman with green hair explained that a medal was required before anyone could participate in duels. A nervous young man is pinned against the wall at knife point by 3 men, and he stammers out a confused apology. Liam Caravan, surprised and curious, turned toward Arhan and asked if the item in question was actually a medal. Both Liam Caravan and Arhan stared ahead, shocked and sweating as anxiety gripped them in the tense silence. Liam Caravan, a sly and ambiguous man, stands in the bustling town with a faintly smug smile as he holds a ring up to the light. Someone unseen remarked that much had changed since the Master's era, recalling how just hours before the Master expected violence and chaos here. Liam Caravan, a nervous but impressed mentor, told Arhan he was proud of how far he'd come. A nervous speaker with a hint of desperation recalled that, in the past, sword skill didn't matter, whether facing a northern killer or an inexperienced farmer. A fierce man with glowing red eyes hefted his axe overhead, threatening Arhan, who braced himself with his sword ready. A clenched fist caught the light as someone declared that the thrill of a no-rules fight was what made the Colosseum unforgettable. A man in a dark robe hovered above the group, angrily demanding to know what kind of blasphemy was unfolding before him. Liam, a thoughtful man with sharp eyes, explained that money was the real reason the Iron Kingdom had not run out of fighters after centuries. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, reflected that the betting crowd would have lost interest if every fight's result was too predictable. Someone remarked that duels became far more exciting when both fighters were evenly matched in strength. A pensive young man with dark hair studied the sign on the stone wall, quietly noting that it meant the times had truly changed. The narrator explained that the arena gained fame across Firma, drawing crowds from distant regions eager to witness the legendary battles. Liam Caravan stood calmly among the villagers, while Arhan watched from the foreground with another man at his side. Sunlight bathed the ancient amphitheater as the narrator reflected that its presence was a driving force behind the city's rise into a sprawling metropolis. Liam Caravan, observant and reflective, remarked that the town's transformation was a remarkable success. A boot stepped forward on the stone floor as someone remarked that gladiators no longer kill each other to win. Still, the speaker reflected that everyone seemed to accept the risk of permanent injury as part of the unspoken rules. An older man with gray hair scoffed at the chaos, telling the crowd he thought the great Colosseum had become nothing but a spectacle. A young man with dark hair sighed, then muttered that in this situation, it might not actually be a bad thing for him. Liam Caravan, wise and encouraging, told Arhan that this could be a valuable opportunity for him. Liam Caravan, experienced in guiding, advised Arhan that facing someone of equal skill could reveal new lessons, and suggested a stop at the blacksmith before their first fight. Liam Caravan, observant and composed, walked beside Arhan and remarked that this place would be nothing like the shabby one near Caravan. Liam Caravan, pragmatic and serious, advised that Arhan's sword was fragile and suggested carrying extra swords for backup. A stoic and contemplative man pauses, his silence hanging heavy in the tense air. Liam Caravan, a wise and patient mentor, gently asked his child what he could see, and Arhan replied with a confused request for clarification. Liam Caravan, a stern blonde-haired man, questioned the imposing figure, demanding to know what he meant. Liam Caravan, a calm and observant blonde-haired man, looks up as a flicker of surprise crosses his face. A determined and focused man's intense gaze cuts through the bright haze, his wide eye reflecting the tension that hangs unspoken in the air. 7 remarkable swords and a shield gleamed on the wall, silent symbols of battles fought and victories remembered inside the fortified town. Rows of unique swords rested quietly in their alcoves, each one marked by its own story and silent promise. Sunlight streamed across 2 swords on the wall as someone muttered in disbelief, unable to process what they were seeing. Someone wondered aloud why so many weapons were displayed together in this hall. Liam, a concerned and cautious man, questioned whether fighting the swordsman out in the street was really the plan. Arhan, a young man with dark hair, and Liam Caravan stand side by by side, both gazing downward with matching seriousness. He stepped forward, his eyes set with determination as sunlight washed over the quiet village behind him. A mysterious figure approached from behind, laughing as he remarked that it seemed to be Liam's first visit to the Hall of Fame. A blond man glanced back in the grand hall and introduced himself as Tom, the keeper. A calm and respectful elder with a monocle rests his hand on his chest, looking quietly satisfied beneath the open blue sky. Outside in the quiet village, a blond young man perked up as Liam Caravan offered to share more about this place. A nervous young man hesitated, then quietly tried to speak. Liam Caravan, a wise and contemplative older man with gray hair, gazed upward, lost in thought. Arhan, a respectful young man, bowed to Liam Caravan and thanked him, saying he was eager to hear more about his generosity. Liam Caravan studied the ornate weapons behind glass and quietly remarked that the selection here was unlike anything he had seen before. The unseen narrator explained that these swords once belonged to former champions of the arena, each with a legacy of spectacular achievements. A knight clad in armor gripped a shining sword, reflecting that their old, rusted blades were now useless as weapons. A shirtless man with brown hair lunged forward, swinging his spear at the heavily armored swordsman who braced himself for the attack. Liam, a determined and spirited fighter, adjusted his hat and declared that the feathers stood for the fierce spirit burning inside him. Sunlight poured over marble columns as two ornamental swords stood silent, while the arena announcer praised the indomitable fighting spirit of the champions. A thoughtful young man studied the mounted swords, then quietly said that he finally understood. Liam Caravan, calm and approachable, offered to answer any questions about the hall. An older man with a mustache smiled and mentioned that being the keeper here brought him small pleasures. Outside in the gentle daylight, Liam Caravan told the attentive young man with blonde hair to ask his question. A mysterious figure in a cloak floated above the ground as a young man with dark hair watched with a focused expression. Liam Caravan flashed a wide, confident smile as he announced that the swords on display were what truly mattered. Liam Caravan fixed Arhan with an intense gaze, making it clear he wanted to know if his point had been understood. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, his eyes wide with shock. Two swords gleamed in a single shaft of light, and an unknown voice declared that something important had just been found. Dark smoke curled from a glowing purple blade, as an unseen voice warned that this would be the next weapon to consume. Ominous purple energy swirled as two swords hovered in the air, their glow deepening with each pulse. Glowing purple fragments drifted across a dark void, and an unseen voice simply stated that the story would continue. Sunlight poured over the grand arches and columns, casting long shadows across the peaceful facade of the classical building. Then, sunlight blazed over the ancient Colosseum as the announcer declared it was time for the gladiators to make their entrance. Arhan walked with purpose through the dim corridor, his dagger casting sharp light along the stone walls. Liam Caravan strode forward with steady confidence, his silhouette sharp against the dim corridor's walls. A backpack hung at the side of a shirted torso, the figure fading into the corridor's pale light. Liam Caravan, a knowledgeable man, explained that it was indeed possible to own one of the swords in the Hall of Fame. Liam Caravan, a wise and knowledgeable man, promised to reveal everything if the hero could prove himself worthy. Liam Caravan, authoritative and knowledgeable, explained to the taller figure that a gladiator could keep one weapon matching the level of their medal. Liam Caravan told Arhan that every time he advanced to a new medal, there would be a change in what he could access. An informative, helpful figure told Arhan he could now choose a weapon, mentioning the one he had been interested in earlier. Light caught on two swords and their matching sheaths, turning the moment silent and expectant. Liam Caravan explained that advancing further would require Arhan to earn a silver medal. A silent and enigmatic figure lingered in partial shadow, their expression unreadable beneath the dim light. Footsteps echoed as an elderly, cautious man stepped into the empty hall, quietly remarking that this place held more treasures than most could imagine. A young man with dark hair walked forward through the corridor, quietly noting that others might see those swords as nothing but junk. Liam Caravan explained that for Arhan, those Those swords meant more than gold, and now he had new reasons to visit the Colosseum beyond just training. Liam Caravan advised that Arhin must rank up and gather swords he could actually use. Liam Caravan, thoughtful and cautious, admitted to Arhin that he wished they could steal all the swords, but knew it was impossible. Liam Caravan, a stern older man, asked his master why the keeper was considered unusual when he seemed completely ordinary. Liam Caravan, calm and confident, remarked that it was difficult to sense such a huge difference in strength. A close-up of an older man's sharp blue eye flickered as the swordsman thought that the keeper was long past his prime. A menacing older man with a glowing aura stepped forward. Someone off-screen declared he was a sword expert. A calm, composed figure stood with hands behind their back, blue flames swirling around them in an unsettling, silent display. A tense hush settled as the unseen narrator revealed that Arhin could form mana armor for absolute defense, prompting Liam Caravan to react in shock. His eyes wide, a young man with dark hair realized someone had reached the threshold just before becoming a swordmaster. Liam Caravan wondered aloud why someone so powerful would choose to work here as just a caretaker. A swordsman with dark hair walked through the torchlit corridor, remarking that true masters of swordsmanship often develop strange habits. Liam Caravan turned with a serious expression, saying they might have to postpone looting the Hall of Fame. Liam Caravan looked back at the shadowed figure and questioned whether they were planning to loot the place after all. Liam Caravan, a reflective older man with a beard, remarked thoughtfully that much about the Colosseum had changed over the years. A mysterious figure, half hidden by torchlight, spoke thoughtfully about how some traditions in this ancient place have managed to endure through the ages. A masked figure gripped a massive blade and spoke about leaving behind reputation and status before stepping into the ring. A deep voice from behind heavy armor declared that he wanted to face his opponent as an equal, meeting as true warriors. Boots clicked steadily across the tiled floor as someone wondered if meeting an opponent simply as another fighter would be enough. A voice, sharp with resolve, insisted that this time the duel could be fought without restraint. A young man with dark hair squared his shoulders, facing a mysterious hooded figure who waited silently with a cane in the sunlit hall. A menacing man gripped the sword tightly, his voice echoing as he called out to the young warrior. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, kept his gaze lowered while the hooded man beside him smirked with his hands folded. A blonde-haired man looked up, asking what was meant by a name in the arena. An authoritative figure explained that everyone who entered the arena left their true names behind. The unseen speaker declared that the mask worn outside the arena would hinder them in battle, and asked for the proud name they intended to use. Liam Caravan, a reflective older man, lingered in silence against the cold brick wall, his thoughts weighed down by the gravity of the moment. Liam Caravan, calm and guiding, gently patted Arhin's head as the young man gazed thoughtfully at the massive sword mounted before them. Liam Caravan, a hopeful man with long hair tied back, gazed upward in silence, his expression soft against the looming shadow of the older portrait. Arhin, a young man with determined eyes, stood beside Liam as they both quietly studied the portrait and the swords displayed beneath it. A lone figure, silhouetted behind barred gates and lit by torchlight, began to declare their gladiator name to the waiting arena. Liam Caravan, a wise and contemplative elder, stood with his cane and considered the poised swordsman across the sunlit floor. A cunning man with a hood and an intense gaze paused, then remarked that he had never heard that name and wondered if it belonged to a hero. A foot pressed forward on the tiled floor, and someone quietly hoped that this first step would guide its owner toward victory. A foot stepped forward and someone above murmured about a young gladiator. A young man with dark hair stands alone, gazing up at the brilliant sky in quiet reflection. Then a confident and purposeful young man strode through the arena's entrance, determination clear in his every step. Still, the young man with dark hair lowered his head and quietly spoke Liam's name. He stared forward with determination, adjusting the mask over his face in one steady motion. The title appears boldly against a faint background of crossed swords, setting the stage for what is to come. Sunlight pours over a silent Colosseum, the empty arena dominated by 3 thrones waiting in the center. Shadows stretch across the vast, empty arena as silence settles like a held breath. A distressed young man with dark hair yells that bronze gladiators are considered the weakest of all. Somebody explained that only casual gamblers come to watch these minor duels, saying these matches simply fill the gaps between main events. Liam Caravan, confident and composed, strides alone into the grand arena as the announcer calls out that it's time for matchups. A serious man with a half mask fixes his gaze forward, stating that what comes next is the true reason behind everything. A wall of noise crashed through the empty arena as the crowd jeered and heckled the fighters relentlessly. Liam Caravan shouted with urgency, his voice cutting through the roar of the arena. Liam Caravan, frustrated and impatient, shouted at the others that he hadn't come all this way just to watch fools fight. Liam Caravan, hostile and commanding, shouted at Arhin that he needed to finish this quickly or just give up and die. Two men shouted a harsh warning, making it clear that anyone wasting their time would face deadly consequences. Someone in the crowd declared that the weak deserve only contempt. A confident older man stood behind a masked young man with a calm, focused gaze, both framed by the vast Colosseum's tense silence. An unseen voice observed that the Iron Kingdom's brutal atmosphere suited a place where only strength mattered, then wondered if all the mockery had worn anyone down. Liam Caravan, a ghostly mentor figure, stood behind the resolute young swordsman as he calmly answered that he did not, in fact, expect mercy. Liam Caravan, a mentor figure with an authoritative presence, encouraged Arhin by saying he approved of Arhin's resolve and welcomed him into the arena as his heir. Liam Caravan fixed his gaze on Arhin and reminded him that the entire history and honor of House Caravan now rested on his shoulders. A close-up captured the serious mouth of a young man with dark hair as he declared his unwavering commitment. A young man with dark hair narrowed his glowing blue eye, determination burning as he prepared to face the challenge ahead. An unseen voice declared their resolve to win, echoing through the empty arena beneath the bright sky. Liam Caravan restrained Arhin as the swordsman loomed above them, his glare daring either to make a move. Energy surged through the arena as the announcer called out that the third bout of the day was about to begin. Liam Caravan, a confident and boastful man, spread his arms wide and told the crowd they would witness rookie gladiators face off in an amateur fight. A determined newcomer sprinted across the arena floor, and the announcer declared he was the freshest of all rookies. A boastful and challenging figure thrust a hand forward, declaring the next fighter had no victories or reputation to speak of. A blonde young man with a mask stood alone in the arena as the crowd erupted in boos, his first duel just about to begin. A young man with dark hair stood tall, his confidence unshaken as the announcer called him the vicious rookie with 3 straight victories. A single blue eye glinted with cold determination as the deadly fighter's reputation sent a silent warning through the arena. A confident and imposing gladiator lifted his massive sword, telling the roaring audience to cheer and jeer as loudly as they wanted. A mysterious and imposing figure in fur and armor stood alone on the platform, surveying the arena below with unwavering confidence. A hulking gladiator with a fierce smile stepped forward as the announcer introduced him as Temur. A young man with dark hair smirked as the unseen announcer declared that a sacred duel was about to begin. The confident and dominant warrior raised his voice, declaring his dedication to the divine goddess Lefri before the crowd. A suspicious and calculating antagonist stared through his helmet, mentioning Liam's name with a cold, questioning tone. From the shadows, an arrogant and disdainful swordsman scoffed, asking why anyone would choose such a pitiful name, one only fit for the weak. Arhin stomped down, saying the other fighter wasn't even worth his effort. A masked man with a sinister grin leaned in, saying he wanted to make a sweet little offer. Liam Caravan ordered Arhin to remove the mask, his tone leaving no room for argument. A menacing and confident antagonist smiled wide beneath his helmet, muttering about mask and sword. Rain hammered the ground as a domineering swordsman threatened Arhin, declaring he'd show mercy only if Arhin danced at his command. Arhin, a young man with dark hair, stared through his mask at the imposing, fur-clad figure looming silently in front of him. The swordsman, aggressive and threatening, told Arhin that gladiators usually followed an unspoken rule, not to kill each other. The swordsman, mocking and aggressive, jeered that Arhin must have truly believed those naive reasons reasons for stepping forward without fear. Arhin, defiant and furious, yelled that he didn't care at all about any unspoken rules. A cruel and ruthless man with a chilling grin declared that in the Zerenia Mountains, only death awaited those too weak to survive. The terrified swordsman insisted he had killed all 3 gladiators he faced in the arena. A menacing man seized another's neck with both hands, tightening his grip as a surge of hostility filled the narrow space between them. The brutal, shadowed man with the helmet growled that he had crushed their necks with his bare hands and watched the life leave their eyes. A brutal impact thundered through the air as the crushing force landed, driving home the raw power behind the unseen attack. The large swordsman lifted a vulnerable young man with dark hair into the air by his collar, radiating pure threat against the blood-red backdrop. A pair of spiked boots struck the blood-red floor as a mysterious figure stood over the scene, asking why anyone wondered about his actions. The dominant, menacing swordsman declared in a cold voice that the victor always decides what happens next. The sinister and menacing antagonist flashed a wild, chilling grin behind his mask, eyes wide with manic intensity. The menacing swordsman scoffed at his unseen opponent, stating that hurting others brought him pleasure, but his current target simply wasn't worth the effort. The cold and merciless antagonist threatened his opponent, saying it made no difference whether he crushed their throat or broke their limbs. A blonde masked man stood tall under the open sky, daring his opponent to start moving with a mocking command. The confident swordsman gripped his blade and told his opponent to entertain both him and the crowd, urging the boy to give it everything. Liam, a serious man with a mask, warned Arhin that this was his only chance to survive. Liam, an outspoken man with sharp eyes, swept his arm toward the swordsman and remarked that the taunts were already flying before the duel had started. Liam Caravan, a serious man with sharp eyes, announced that this match might deliver a spectacle far beyond any previous bronze-level fights. Liam Caravan, a stern man with a sinister smile, ordered the gladiators to take their positions. A fist clenched tight against the sky as the crowd roared for the fight to begin. An armored, battle-ready man stood in the arena, gripping his sword with absolute confidence as the crowd waited in tense anticipation. A young man with dark hair gripped his shining sword, standing firm as he faced his imposing opponent in the arena. A confident figure stepped forward, suggesting to someone unseen that they had an offer to make. A trembling, nervous mouth barely managed to stammer out a shaky request for an apology in the bright glare of the open arena. The confident and imposing antagonist held his sword steady, facing down an opponent whose blade hovered just inches from his chest. A tense voice echoed through the empty arena, threatening to end anyone quickly if they dared insult the speaker's name. Liam Caravan stood alone, tense and determined, gripping his sword as dust swirled around him against the barred backdrop. The defiant, antagonistic man grimaced, then let out a mocking smirk to show he found the situation laughable. The bearded man in heavy armor threw his head back and laughed, his voice booming across the arena in open triumph. A muscular, shirtless man shielded his face from the blinding light flooding the arena. The smirking man with a mocking tone jeered that the young lord was braver than expected, pretending to be frightened for the crowd's amusement. Inside the stone-walled room, Liam Caravan and the swordsman mocked that someone was frightened and had let fanciful stories go to his head. Then, the swordsman leaned over the railing and mocked Liam's name, while the other man warned him not to make the kid cry. Laughter echoed across the bright sky as the unseen speaker taunted Arhin, mocking his connection to his dead father and the restless crowd. The armored and resolute antagonist raised his gleaming shield high and shouted that he was fired up. The hostile and aggressive swordsman threatened to beat Arhin to a pulp, daring him to start fighting before it was too late. The armored figure, determined and silent, slowly lifted his helmet to reveal only a hint of the face beneath. The sinister and threatening antagonist revealed a twisted grin beneath his dark helmet. Drool smeared across his lips, the antagonistic swordsman clutched his chest, struggling for breath as pain flashed across his face. A swordsman with a bloodied blade swung down hard as an agile young man leaned back, narrowly dodging the attack. A steel-clad leg crashed down, sending a spray of blood across the stone floor. A dark, swirling energy crackled to life, and a disembodied voice warned them that the message would be repeated once more. A black-gloved fist slammed into the helmet of a wounded and shocked swordsman, blood spraying as Arhin pressed his attack. A fierce and vengeful antagonist glared, demanding an apology for the insult to his name. A dominant and menacing antagonist leveled a threat, telling Arhin he might only get mercy if he truly wished for a quick end. Liam Caravan reached out his hand, his gaze steady with determination. Arhin, an injured but determined young man, forced himself upright as Liam Caravan urged him on, and the swordsman closed in with a fierce warning. The angry and confrontational swordsman clenched his fist and demanded an apology for the insult to his name. A shocked and injured Liam Caravan recoiled as blood spattered, the blurred shape of an unseen attacker looming just in front of him. The aggressive swordsman raised his fist over Arhin and warned that only those who wished for a swift end should challenge him further. Liam extended his hand forward, his focus sharpening as determination flickered in his intense gaze. The angry swordsman bared his teeth and muttered a single word, his jaw clenched tight with fury. A young man with dark hair crouched among the ruins, gripping his sword as someone off-screen shouted an insult at him. A menacing swordsman twisted his blade with a sharp motion, every muscle tense as his attack gathered momentum. A thunderous impact shook the ground as the strike landed with full force. Liam Caravan met the blow head-on, his sword braced against the furious swordsman's powerful downward strike. Debris erupted across the arena as an explosion struck, and somewhere within the chaos, a figure cried out in pain. Then a determined young man with dark hair skidded forward through the dust, weapon drawn and eyes locked on his target. A helmeted man grimaced, groaning in pain as he shouted his frustration. Blood pooled at the base of a wounded hand as the unknown man gripped a cold piece of metal, his resolve unwavering. Blood dripped from the wound, and someone screamed in agony as the pain intensified. The swordsman, a menacing figure, screamed in agony as pain overwhelmed him. A heavy foot slammed down through the rain, and someone screamed in terror as the downpour blurred the world into chaos. Liam Caravan wiped sweat from his brow while Arhin, jaw clenched, stared ahead with unwavering determination. A soft, mischievous laugh slipped from unseen lips, filling the air with an unsettling energy. A wild, thunderous battle cry exploded overhead, rattling the arena as the crowd surged with anticipation. A young man with dark hair stands alone in the arena, lifting his sword as the crowd roars in support. Radiant lines pulse from a faint magical circle, framing two swords suspended in a moment of silent anticipation. The title appears on the page, signaling a pause as the story's name and creators are quietly displayed. A bearded man in a helmet scowled, demanding to know what was happening and making his confusion clear. Someone in the shadows pointed out that the kid had been trembling with fear just moments ago. Liam Caravan stood with his hands clenched. Someone pointed out that he had been stuttering. A bearded armored man stared at his bleeding hand, then demanded to know how the boy could have possibly managed such a feat. Arhin, an agile and alert young man, twists aside just in time as the swordsman's blade crashes down from above. A bloodshot eye snapped wide as the character gasped in shock, fearing their realization might be true. A young man with dark hair narrowed his eyes, suspecting that Liam Caravan had been acting like a coward on purpose. A shadowy figure with a glowing blue eye stands silently, radiating menace in the stark white glare. Face to face, the cunning swordsman tried to trick Arhin by acting weak, hoping to lure him into dropping his guard. Liam Caravan, cunning and confident, smirked and told the other person he hoped they weren't about to criticize him for his deception. A menacing and intense man narrowed his eye, warning the unseen figure that their intentions had already been made obvious. A menacing man with glowing eyes delivered a cold warning, saying this was no place for children or games. The angry swordsman ground his teeth, stammering as he tried to confront someone with a choked, furious accusation. A furious man's hand snapped a weapon into place, spitting out a curse at the unseen adversary he called a devious little scumbag. The aggressive swordsman hurled himself forward, shouting that he would butcher his opponent. A hulking swordsman with a helmet lunged, his glowing red eye burning as he charged forward with ruthless intent. He gripped the sword's handle tightly, muscles tensed for a brutal strike. Liam, an agile and focused swordsman, swung his blade in a swift arc to counter the fierce attack coming toward him. A menacing swordsman unleashed a powerful slash, the attack cutting through the air as the alert young man braced himself. The fierce and determined swordsman's eye glowed with intensity as he muttered a curse under his breath. A blast shot across the arena as an unseen voice shouted for someone to fire at Arhin. The masked, aggressive swordsman whips his blade through the air, the force of his swing cutting sharply across the tense arena. Arhin, alert and tense, barely slips past another lethal attack as observers note he seems to avoid each strike by the narrowest margin. Then, a devastating strike lands with flawless accuracy, every motion radiating the ferocity and control of a true master. Arhin, a determined young man with dark hair, lunges forward and thrusts his sword at an unseen opponent, splitting the air with a fierce slash. Debris explodes outward as the determined young man with dark hair drives his sword down with unstoppable force. Liam Caravan, a terrified and stressed man, gasps in fear as sweat drips from his wide, panicked eye. A confused and exhausted antagonist tries to make sense of Arhin, muttering questions about who this mysterious kid could possibly be. A giant snake with glowing eyes towers above a sword-wielding man, its massive head lowering as it threatens to strike. A warrior with armor and fur reaches down toward a glowing portal, his hand steady as the sword beside him casts a long shadow. A massive scaled snake slides violently across the ground, scattering dust as someone off-panel shouts with disbelief about the timing. Dust scatters as a foot slides swiftly across the ground, the unseen fighter moving into position. A masked figure with glowing eyes, determined and fierce, slams his fist into the ground, sending a shockwave rippling out in every direction. Fingers clamp down on the sword's hilt, tension building as the next move hangs in the balance. A towering man with an aggressive stance drives his massive blade toward the ground, the force of his attack echoing through the tense arena. Blood splatters across the dark surface as an unseen assailant drives the weapon down in a rapid, relentless rhythm. Arhin, injured and shocked, lets out a strangled cry as the swordsman's attack lands. A fighter unleashes a fierce shout while launching a forceful strike in the middle of the chaotic arena. A fierce and aggressive man swings his massive blade with a powerful swoosh, the weapon carving through the narrow corridor. Dust swirling in the air, Liam Caravan sprints for the glowing portal as debris clatters behind him. Then a solitary figure climbs the stairs toward a brilliant light, each step echoing with anticipation. A bloodied man stands his ground as the swordsman advances, tension crackling between them in the dim corridor. A young man with dark hair narrows his gaze, focusing on the vast arena under the clear blue sky. The injured but determined swordsman pants heavily, gripping his large sword with white knuckles in the empty, echoing arena. The wounded but still fighting swordsman lowers his blade near a faint bloodstain, his breath ragged and harsh in the tense silence. A bloody blade slams into the ground as the aggressive, ruthless swordsman drives it down with fierce force. A sword slipped from the antagonist's grip, clattering onto the cold arena floor with a harsh, metallic clang. The aggressive swordsman drove his blade into a young man with dark hair, who cried out in agony as he crashed backward, blood spilling. A masked man watches coldly as the sword he dropped plummets toward the ground. A figure stepped into the arena, passing by the wounded swordsman who lay motionless on the blood-streaked floor. Someone offered a final warning, saying the recipient would get one more chance. A calm young man with dark hair stands over the injured swordsman, his blade held steady and pointed downward in silent dominance. The dominating antagonist glared with contempt and ordered the other man to take off his helmet. A masked man with a steely gaze threatened that his opponent should keep fighting and humiliate himself. Liam Caravan, ominous behind his mask, warned that everything was unfolding exactly in time with his clapping. Liam Caravan stood beneath the empty chest, his calm gaze fixed upward as if searching for something beyond the silence. Liam Caravan, angry and defensive, warned the imposing swordsman that he would hold back from causing serious harm. A young man with dark hair gasped for breath as swirling dust and debris filled the lifeless air around him. A muscular man wearing a helmet glared upward, his breath quick and heavy as tension crackled through the air. Blood streaked the ground as an injured but determined young man reached out, muttering in pain while his fingers brushed the hilt of the fallen sword. The man in the helmet spoke quietly, telling himself it was time to move forward. A dark, blood-like shadow crept across the floor as an unseen voice accepted the offer, asking for just a moment to prepare. A fearful and hesitant figure's anxious eye darted, whispering that they couldn't go on. A young man with dark hair fought to steady his breathing, muttering that he just needed a moment to catch his breath. A hand slammed a knife downward, the blade cutting through the tense silence. A ruthless swordsman drove his blade straight through Arhin's hand, blood spraying as pain surged through the determined young man. Arhin, determined and aggressive, drove his sword into the wounded antagonist, forcing the swordsman to grimace in pain. Blood splattered as the aggressive attacker stabbed Arhin, his shocked expression frozen in that violent instant. A young man with dark hair clenched his teeth, his face twisted with fierce determination beneath the weight of black armor. A menacing and intimidating swordsman locked his intense blue eyes on his unseen opponent and warned him to reconsider his next move. A fist crashed down, forcing a harsh, guttural cry from someone writhing in pain. The menacing swordsman, sweat glistening on his face, warned that his offer was about to run out. At the center of the empty coliseum, a determined young man with dark hair faced a hostile, imposing combatant beneath the clear sky. Arhin, remorseful and humbled, lowered his head and apologized to Liam Caravan for disrespecting the family name. Light flickered across a shadowed metal helmet as a mysterious and intimidating figure revealed his face. A hopeful and anxious man and a nervous swordsman looked forward as someone nearby pleaded for forgiveness and begged to be spared. Arhin and Liam Caravan exchanged a silent look, the air between father and son calm and heavy with unspoken meaning. A deafening scream tore through the arena, shaking the silence and drawing every eye toward its source. Arhin, a confident young man, and Liam, his supportive father, raised their fists together in a burst of victorious laughter. A young man with dark hair stared ahead, one eye blazing as a sudden realization gripped him. Just beyond the arena's roar, a menacing and confident figure clenched their fist, a crooked grin twisting across their face in the shadows. A brown-haired observer burst out in amazement, saying the rookie's strength was unlike anything they'd seen from a bronze in a long time. Liam Caravan, a broad-shouldered man, burst into laughter and told his companion he planned to bet even more on the winner next time. Liam Caravan, confident and teasing, leaned in and asked if Arhin had already forgotten what happened. Liam Caravan looked upward, his face set with determination as someone shouted his name across the tense arena. The crowd roared as Liam Caravan raised his gleaming sword, hearing his title as the gladiator announced throughout the arena. Someone from the shadows called out Liam's name, their voice urgent as the mysterious figure stood motionless in the blinding column of light. A silent figure stood facing the wooden wall as someone shouted Liam's name from behind. A subtle smirk curled across the mouth of an insightful and confident figure, who quietly admitted there was more to Liam than anyone realized. A mouth half hidden in shadow acknowledged that Arhin had already won over the crowd with his first duel, calling him a promising young man. Sunlight washed over a calm older man with a monocle as he sat quietly on a bench, legs crossed in peaceful silence. Liam Caravan, a thoughtful older man, admitted he was worried about Arhin. A wary figure kept their face shrouded in darkness, quietly thinking it was dangerous to attract too much attention in this arena. A silver-haired man with earphones sat in the dim auditorium, turning his gaze toward the open door at the back. A low voice warned that taking further action now might be more dangerous than helpful. A confident and sociable man gestures as he talks, while a charismatic swordsman listens and gives a calm smile in response. A bright sky stretched overhead as the narrator reflected on feeling trapped in a repeating cycle, unable to escape the nightmare laid before them. A few days slipped by beneath a calm, cloud-lit sky. Sunlight washed over the grand arena as clouds drifted lazily by, hinting at the calm before the coming storm. Someone, partially visible in front of the wall banner, suddenly blurted out a shocked question. Liam Caravan stood indoors, surprised and uneasy, a bead of sweat tracing down his face as silence filled the room. A cheerful woman with braided hair repeated her explanation, telling Liam Caravan she was happy to clarify things for him at the counter. A woman with green hair raised her finger and cheerfully told Arhin the arena organizers were very impressed with his performance. A woman with green braided hair leaned in, saying the organizers wanted to make Arhin an offer that matched his abilities, even if it broke tradition. A silver medal glinted beneath the spotlight as the announcer declared there would be a duel for silver promotion. Liam Caravan, a serious and confrontational man, asked Arhin if he would accept the challenge. Faint particles drifted through the darkness as the words signaled the story would continue another day.